I didn't even try and see if Audacity worked. Yep, good. Got lucky.
Right there with you, Bill. I was just telling Joe I'm on a fresh 21 install as well. So, yeah, we'll see how this goes.
Shut all that off. Okay. Yeah, for dear listener, dear viewer, are you on a fresh install, Norbert?
No, it's
Norbert has left the building.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
No.
I can hear him.
Okay. It's the same I've been using for, well, since January. But I think this is the first time I'm...
Yeah, that's weird. I could hear him, but Joe couldn't. And when you heard him, I didn't hear anything.
And there he goes. Oh, boy.
Well, it says he's still there. It's just he's not visible.
Right.
I've got the director's panel. Oh, yep. Director's panel says he's there. Oh, you know.
4 times in the past.
There he is.
There he is again.
My IP keeps changing. It changed like 4 times in the past 15 minutes.
You should probably restart your router.
Okay.
Are you on Fedora?
Time.
Okay, I will try restarting the router.
Okay. We shall wait. And my picture is blurry. What do we have going on here? Silly ass camera.
Well, this ought to be a firecracker of an episode. I'm like, I don't do anything to my installs.
I don't
do anything to Mint, but
right,
that, whatever.
All right, Joe. You and I will basically be a pass.
I changed like some of the pin to panels.
Right.
That's it. I unpinned Firefox. I pinned Chrome. I pinned VLC. Maybe
grab a snack
Discord,
and call it a day.
WhatsApp, and Telegram, depending on what I'm planning on doing with the device.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yep. Yeah, this one's going to be a doozy.
Well, I don't change anything on Mint on this machine, basically. Well, I do add a few. I pin a couple of things.
Sure.
But I don't even change the wallpaper because I think it's pretty slick.
Same.
I mean, if you want me to talk about, well, no, because sometimes I will change the wallpaper to something like comic related or anime related, just because I'm a nerd. But I also adjust the mouse and the touchpad and increase the sensitivity because I don't feel like waiting all day to scroll all the way across the damn screen.
Yeah. So I guess I do move the show desktop. That little desklet that I think by default Mint puts it right next to the menu. I don't remember.
That's where it's at.
Yeah, I move it all the way to the right, just like Windows has it.
I think Tom does the same thing, if I recall correctly. So you can slam it down there, like on Windows.
Because I'm used to having I put it's a custom applet that you have to download, but it's basically just the shortcuts to your different folders in the file manager. I put that next to the menu. And then it's just, I've got the software manager, Firefox, Thunderbird, Audacity, OBS Studio, the terminal, file manager, and Video Ninja.
You guys do any like web apps?
That's what I was just getting ready to say. The Video Ninja, I made a web app out of that. Instead
the only web app I run is Coinbase.
I've got a web app. I made a web app out of Pandora and Video Ninja and Tootnoda email, because I don't care much for they've got what they call as a native application, but it's just a Electron app. So
yeah, I use it on the desktop. It's not great, but
I mean, you're not getting full desktop integration with this stuff. It's basically just Electron, so you might as well just make it yourself out of Firefox.
Yeah, it's probably a better idea. I didn't think of doing that. I mostly have just my entertainment stuff on here, like Shudder and Netflix and Prime Video and that kind of stuff. Yeah. Just quick launch that.
Yeah, and that works great for that. That's almost, I dare say, the best web apps tool out there, in my opinion, because it's available it's available on Arch through the AUR, and it works just as good on there as it does everywhere else for me.
Yeah.
Because now that you mention it, I've got a Netflix and Prime app on my laptop that I take on the road.
Yeah, they seem pretty handy for that.
What are we going to do without Moss to do the 3, 2, 1? Anybody else know how to count backwards from 3?
I've done it before. I used to do it all the time. The whole time period where Moss wasn't a part of the show, it was either me or Tony doing it. Well, Tony did it quite a bit.
One less thing I got to worry about.
We need to get Tony back.
I got to be honest. I missed the minute Leo left. I missed him.
Yeah.
He had he was a natural.
Yep.
Okay. So, Norbert.
Yes.
Good to have you back.
We need to give him a couple minutes to make sure he's here to stay.
Yeah, need to give it a couple minutes.
Meanwhile,
a couple minutes behind.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I'm in the Voidlin. What is it? Handbook. It says a simple way to go.
Yeah, he's not working yet.
What on earth?
This does not bode well.
I'm going to do Discord, let everybody know that we're having technical difficulties. And Telegram. I'll tell everybody on Telegram.
You handle Discord. I'll just do Telegram real quick.
To which everyone will say, not mintCast, technical difficulties.
Well, we don't really need to announce that, do we? Because we are streaming.
Are we?
Yeah.
Now?
Yeah.
All right.
It doesn't really matter. Let me...
I was told we weren't streaming yet.
We weren't, and now we are.
And now we are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hi,
I started.
Everybody.
Let me get the get shareable link.
We have problems.
Yeah. me go ahead and make the announcements. And then start Telegram. I haven't tried Telegram yet. I gotta be honest. I don't know why everybody likes it so much.
I deleted mine. I don't even have it anymore.
You don't monitor the mintCast Telegram?
Not a lot. It just, whenever I've had trouble on the desktop and it's because of an app, it's always been because of Telegram, and I don't know if that's an isolated case or not.
That's really weird you're having those issues with Chrome and Chromium. I don't know what in the heck that could be.
I don't know.
It's weird.
It's just the open source gods telling me to use Firefox.
Right.
I said, you know what, Bill, you talk a lot of crap about open source, and then you go and use Chrome to make mintCast, but it's just that, unfortunately, Google Docs works better on Chrome or Chromium. And so it and then you've got that option to open separate profiles. So I could have one window open with my personal profile, another window open with my personal mintCast profile, and then another one with the official mintCast profile, and then like use that one for the streaming, which you can achieve that with Firefox, but it's a little less straightforward. But that's what I'm doing right now, is it's all on Firefox.
Well, good deal. At least it's working. I noticed they fixed a couple of websites. Like I couldn't pay my T-Mobile phone bill on Firefox because it just refused to load the page. And I tried it this morning, and with the latest update, looks like that's working again.
And then on my phone, I use Fennec, which is the F-Droid version of Firefox.
Oh, yeah.
Did you get it all figured out, Norbert?
Nope, but I rebooted into Fedora. It seems to be only affecting Void. But of course it's the case. Every time I have something, I have to fix it, so it's just Void.
Linux Mint, Norbert. Linux Mint, my brother.
Mint.
We'll get Toyam on, and you can yell at him.
Yep. Nope. I choose to suffer.
Choose to suffer.
No, we'll get Toyam on, and you can yell at one of the developers.
I think that's pretty much an open source thing.
Huh?
Let's give it a couple minutes to make sure he's going to stay online, and then.
Yeah. So am I hosting?
Yeah.
It depends on whether or not you stay connected.
That'll be interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Let's all act real dumb if he gets cut off in the middle of hosting.
What happened? Oh my gosh. How do we fix this problem?
Speak for myself when I say I don't need to act that hard.
Either Bill will say over to you, Joe, or I will say over to you, Bill, and then we'll have a new host.
There you go.
And then it's kind of how that's a demonstration of life in general, isn't it?
Right.
You go to somebody's funeral, and then almost immediately people start making plans of the next thing they're going to do.
Right.
Life goes on. They were making plans before they showed up at the funeral.
Exactly.
I think it happened probably simultaneously. You both would say over to you at the same time and be like two trains colliding, and then it just
your
be
job notice was posted before your obituary. Don't worry.
I am fairly certain that if I was to pass, my truck would be filled right away. But but then there would be another open truck for several months.
Pretty sure I'd get exhumed and dumped back into my truck and be told to drive. Put some dirt on it.
Driver shortage right now that people want my truck, but they don't want a truck driving job.
A few weeks ago, when you tuned in while you were driving, I wanted to say that the truck interior looks really nice, real modern and stuff.
Oh, yeah, and that's a 2000. It's a 2010.
Yeah, you just need to get one of them Google automated trucks.
Oh no!
Drives themselves. Yeah.
Picture yourself down in a car and you look up at a truck going by and there's no driver.
For a second, I lost Joe's picture, and I was, because whenever I lose connection, it's always the images always go out one by one, and I was afraid for a moment, but I think it's not happening.
I think he's just sitting really, really still.
Okay, my IP hasn't changed yet, so
there I moved.
This is good.
I think we're good. You want to do
Can I have 2 seconds real quickly? I just need to address something, and I will be right back.
You just need to come up with a something clever for.
You need to
drop off the kids at the pool or something.
Need to recompile the kernel. Other than Google Chrome, I was really impressed with the upgrade.
I still got it running over there.
It takes a long time, and it's going to stop if you've got any problems too. So keep an eye on it, because it goes through it in steps, and if it has problems, it'll walk you through, or it'll take you to whatever interface you need to use to fix the problem.
Well, it's in the upgrade phase now.
Okay. Where to rock?
It's underwhelming, though, to say the least, because the only graphical difference I noticed a problem right away. The monitors were out of order. I had to go into the display settings and rearrange where the monitors were.
Well, hopefully you only have to do that once.
Yeah. Well, I restarted it 3 times trying to get Chrome to work right, and it seems okay. Yeah, that's better. Whenever everybody's ready.
Okay, so first up is the 3, 2, 1 record, if everybody's ready. All right. No complaints?
Nope.
3, 2, 1, record. All righty then, if everybody's ready for our 3, 2, 1, 0. 3, 2.
But what about the 20-second silence?
After the 0.
No, we always do that before.
You don't usually do it that way.
Oh, okay. Well, then let's do our 20 seconds of silence now.
Okay.
My fault. And 20 seconds of silence. All right. Everybody ready?
Yeah.
3, 2, 1, 0.
0.
Good enough for government work.
Wow, that's loud.
What's loud?
My microphone. Does it sound loud to you guys?
No, but would it surprise you if Video Ninja corrected that automatically?
On Firefox, it doesn't seem to. On Chrome, it does. But whatever. I'll look at it real quick here. Proceed.
One moment. Okay. Welcome to mintCast, the podcast by the Linux Mint community for all users of Linux. This is episode 393. This is episode 393.5, recorded on Sunday, the 7th of August, 2022. Trying not to get my tongue in a twist, I'm Norbert.
Nursing a sore back, I'm Bill.
It's hot. I'm Joe.
Reveling in fresh minty goodness, I'm Josh T.
First up in the news, Vanessa is finally here, and so is the Linux kernel version 5.19, which was published from an M1 Mac by Linus Torvalds. And I mispronounced his name again. Which was published from an M1 Mac Mac by Linus Torvalds. In security and privacy, sale of over 1 billion Chinese users' data found. DuckDuckGo is finally blocking Microsoft trackers, and Linux 6.0 to have runtime verification for running on safety-critical systems. Then in our wanderings, Bill is hearing things, Joe is soldering on, and I am taming the fox, like it was written in that book by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I have no idea if I pronounced that right. In our inner section, we discuss the changes we usually make to the systems and desktop environments we use to fit our workflows and to make ourselves feel at home. And finally, the feedback and a couple of suggestions. I think I'm getting better and better at this. Still not great, but I'm getting there.
You did great.
Who wants to read the first piece of news?
I'll get it. Mint 21 is out. New features. When can I upgrade without a nuke and pave? The answer to that is upgrade tool expected to be released tomorrow, Monday, August 8th.
Or if you are listening to the audio version 2 days ago.
Right. Well, so you can apt install it right now. We'll get to that in a minute. And a little side note from Londoner, just a reminder for anyone who likes to use the command line for updates and upgrades, sudo is not required for the Mint version of apt. It is called automatically. However, you do, of course, need it with the Debian version of apt and with Mint upgrade. I didn't know that.
I didn't either, and honestly, I'll probably still always type sudo because habit.
Yeah, big habit. Yeah. Because if I start trying to develop the habit of not doing it, and then all my other Debian-based distros are going to suffer if and when they exist. So
I know that a couple of Arch AUR helpers like Paru don't need sudo to be typed, but I still do it when I use it because just
Yay is like the most blessed one right now, and it will refuse to work if you give it sudo privileges. It'll tell you shouldn't install AUR packages from as root.
Yeah, I think Paru is just a rewrite of Yay in Rust.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, cool. But anyway, and I shared a link to the show notes on the YouTube page, but to make it simple, the following will just work in Mint. You do an apt update and then an apt upgrade, tac Y if you don't want to mess with the interaction. And then you apt install Mint upgrade, all one word. That is the new package that it's a GUI application, sort of. And then you do a sudo Mint upgrade, and that opens up the GUI, which will walk you through kind of the process of doing an in-place upgrade from 20.3 to 21. And I just did it an hour before the show, and it was relatively benign. I had no problem except for Google Chrome, Chromium, anything like that. It just hung on me every time I tried to do anything. So I don't know if that's because I did an in-place upgrade or what, but had to completely get rid of Chrome. I'll get to that later on. However, we recommend caution if you are not familiar with the command line. Rather wait for the official announcement on the Linux Mint blog and read the instructions there. So if you're familiar and you're a madman like we are, you can just go ahead and follow those. It's relatively simple instructions, I think.
Yeah, I'm running it on one of my machines right now.
Yeah, Joe's actually running it right now. And when I was doing it, it came up with a few things I had to go back and fix along the way. It wasn't all that dramatic. The one thing I had to fix was basically I had to get rid of the PPA for Balena Etcher, and I just ended up uninstalling that application. Apparently, at one point they had a PPA, and then they didn't. They're not keeping it up to date, so I don't know. I just got rid of that. Something else it ran into. There was a few packages that didn't exist anymore, and so it asked me to get rid of those too. But it's rather thorough in its process of going through and making sure you've got the right stuff installed to begin with, and then it does some simulation, and then the downloading, and it almost doesn't let you screw it up, from what I can tell.
I know that when I went to the official website for Etcher, the official download was an app image. So I'm not sure if there are other official sources. So maybe they just want people to use the app image.
Well, at the time that I installed it, I'm not a big fan of app image, and please keep your hate mail to a minimum. At the time, on the same page that talked about the app image, it said that there is also a PPA, and that's how I got that PPA, was from their website. But that's been a few months back, so I don't know if they don't support that anymore, or if maybe they're only maintaining a PPA for Focal and not for Jammy yet. That's another thing that would cause this to happen. So there's a few reasons why that might not work right. But if I ever need that again, I'll just install the app image, I guess. It seems to be okay. Some app images don't have real good integration into the desktop, so I've never been a huge fan. But other than that, I did have a problem. I'll get to that later on, but I did have a problem with Chromium and Chrome and the flat pack of Chrome. None of those worked right after the upgrade. But other than that, it was smooth and completely devoid of drama in my case at all.
Okay, moving on.
Sorry,
Linux
just
kernel
one comment. I haven't tried Mint 21 yet, but from what I read, the most exciting thing for me is the rebasing of Muffin. The window manager there, it was a fork of Matter GNOME's window manager from when GNOME 3 was started, and they now rebased it on Matter 3.36, which is still I think 2 years outdated, but it's still a better. It should still make things a lot better and much improved compared to the previous version of Muffin.
Well, it puts them in line to be more able to start utilizing Wayland in the future too.
Yeah,
I think
there were some growing pains that GNOME 3 had, but then they fixed that. But that was after Muffin was forked, so which were still plaguing the previous versions of Muffin. Some performance issues. So I'm hoping to see much improved performance just generally. I don't think they've commented anything on moving to Wayland yet.
No, I've seen that Clem says it hasn't been on the roadmap so far, but maybe at some point down the line.
Well, I mean, Wayland is all about the window manager, and now they don't have to worry about it because they're using a window manager that's got the Wayland support, basically.
But But also because 21 was just released, now they have a 2-year window before Mint 22 to decide whether they want to move to Wayland, and if they do, to implement it.
Right on. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, Linux kernel 5.19 released with 7 new features. This is from Make Use Of. The latest version of the Linux kernel 5.19 has been finally released with several new features and improvements to existing kernel components. ARM-related performance boosts, Intel overheating and battery drain fixes, long arch CPU architecture support, graphical improvements, numerous networking additions, newly enabled accessories, better compression. The kernel now supports ZSTD compressed firmware.
I think I read somewhere that these Intel overheating and battery drain fixes, these battery drain fixes affect Intel CPUs from generation 6 to 10. And a few months ago or weeks ago, someone on Telegram mentioned, when I was talking about battery performance in Windows versus Linux, someone mentioned that while Windows has a better battery life on most CPUs, Linux seems to have a much improved since Intel Generation 11. And they specifically said that Windows had a better, or rather Linux had a worse battery life between Intel CPUs 6 to 10 generations. So I'm wondering whether this has to do with that. Maybe not, because they also said the same thing about AMD CPUs. I don't remember a lot, but I just remember that conversation from this. Well, I know that my Intel 11th generation CPU doesn't get as much battery time with Linux as it is advertised, which is, I assume, is with Windows in mind.
Okay, and as a continuation of that, Linus Torvald released kernel 5.19 on the M2 MacBook Air. And this is also from Ars Technica and Make Use Of. Linux runs on various ARM devices, but the experience pales in comparison to how well Linux runs on Intel devices. While there remains a big gap between the two, progress continues. ARM support has reached a level where Linus Torvalds tested and released this version of the kernel using an ARM laptop, an Apple M2 MacBook Air. Special thanks to the Asahi team, which has been working to get Linux up and running on Apple Silicon.
It should also be noted that I think Linus has gone on record for saying this is going to be the last of the 5 dot series kernels.
Well, I just find it surprising.
That means anything.
I just find it surprising how quickly it made it onto the M2, considering how long it took to get onto the M1.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
we're not.
there was some news from the Asahi team that they tested the M2 CPUs, and they said it was surprisingly easy to port the kernels and versions and stuff from M1 to work on M2. So it's not that different from M1.
So they weren't starting from scratch the way they were with the M1.
And
Right.
I quickly
It was
pulled up the
graphical
mailing list.
acceleration that they were having the most problems with, wasn't it?
I think they now even have a graphics driver.
Oh,
I'm not sure, but
I think it's on the roadmap. I don't know that it's mainlined or anything, but I know that initially when they got graphics working through the CPU, some people were getting better performance through the CPU than some other Linux distros were getting through the GPU, which is, I'm not sure how I feel about that. But I guess when I look at it critically, I just think, well, yeah, it's an expensive piece of hardware, so you would expect better performance on a more expensive piece of hardware.
Yeah, I don't think people would want to buy Apple hardware with the specific goal to run Linux on it until they can take full advantage of it. And I quickly pulled up the mailing list on the kernel.org, and I just want to read a couple of lines from Linus's email, the announcement. He says, on a personal note, the most interesting part here is that I did the release and I am writing this on an ARM64 laptop. It's something I've been waiting for a long time, and it's finally reality, thanks to the Asahi team. We've had ARM64 hardware running Linux for a long time, but none of it has really been usable as a development platform until now. It's the third time I'm using Apple hardware for Linux development. I did it many years ago for PowerPC development on a PPC 970 machine, and then a decade plus ago when the MacBook Air was the only real thin and light around, and now as an ARM64 platform. So when he says hardware for Linux development, it specifically means that I assume compiling the kernel itself. So I assume he must have compiled the kernel and tested it on the Apple hardware before releasing it.
I don't think so. I think he did the development somewhere else and then just.
No, I mean compiling as in just compiling and testing it before releasing the source code.
I mean, I suppose we could presume that. Leo in the chat is busting your chops a little bit. Linus Torvalds did buy an MTU with that purpose, Norbert. Apparently he bought that thing with the purpose of updating the Linux kernel. I guess. I mean, again, I don't know how I feel. Obviously, the only real world use is for the developers that want Linux tools, or they want development tools that they can use on a high-end piece of hardware. I don't know. Or, for eventually when Apple just stops supporting this piece of hardware, but yet this piece of hardware still has 15 years of usability left on it. You still got Asahi that you can run on it and whatever else is available by that time. It's impressive, though, to be sure.
Yeah. And now let's move on to security and privacy. Who wants to take the first one?
I guess I can do that. Or Josh, you want to do it?
Yeah, that's fine. I can do it.
Okay.
Okay, security warning after sale of stolen Chinese data. And this is from BBC.com. President Xi Jinping has urged public bodies to defend information security after a hacker offered to sell stolen data of 1 billion Chinese citizens. In an advert on a criminal forum, later removed, the user said the data was stolen from Shanghai National Police. The hacker claims the information includes names, addresses, national ID numbers, and mobile phone numbers. Cybersecurity experts have verified that at least some of a small sample of the data offered is real. The 23 terabytes of data is thought to be the largest ever sale of data on record and was being offered for 200,000 or 166,000 pounds until the post was removed.
So the pot calling the kettle black.
Yeah.
I had to look up what the English equivalent was. In Hungarian, we say the owl said to the sparrow here that it has a large head or something like that.
Yeah. Because in their culture, it's almost these things when you're taking advantage of other people's technology, it's almost like a normal way of doing things. But when it comes back home to roost, then now it's a problem.
Yeah, like for example, how TikTok is a Chinese product, but it is banned in China explicitly, and they have a separate service with another name for Chinese citizens.
No red flags there.
Yeah, so they banned it in China because they know it's harmful, but of course they are happy to export it to abroad.
From what I can tell, the most harmful thing about TikTok is all the trucks that go off the road because the driver is sitting behind the wheel watching TikTok videos while he's driving. And that, yeah, kids, that is a thing.
And also, people's attention spans seem to be getting shorter and shorter. Even if you're, I've never I never made a TikTok account, and I don't plan to either. And I never really was on Vine, and I don't really use Instagram and anything like that, neither Twitter. Sometimes I browse Reddit, but sometimes I will notice that my attention span isn't the same as it was 5 years ago. So it's a bit alarming.
Yeah, it's a good time to sit down and read a book. Yeah. That'll help.
Even when I'm on YouTube, I consciously try to consume more long-form content, like 30-minute plus video essays and stuff like that I can just listen to.
That you can crank up to 2x.
I do that with audiobooks sometimes, but I don't. When there's a video or essay that has background music, I really don't enjoy it when the background music is also 2x.
I think it's just kind of a larger comment on society at large, really. I mean, we're kind of living in this instant gratification time where you can order things and have them delivered to your door the next day. And I think it's just consistent with all of that.
One day I was sitting on my bed browsing Reddit on my phone, and then I noticed that I had one sock on one foot. And then I realized that the reason why I sat down on the bed was to put on socks. I put one of them on, and then somehow the phone got into my head, and I forgot that I was sitting there in the first place. So that was the point when I said, "Okay, this is something that's serious."
Yep. Although I just say that that's been happening for a very long time. Maybe not because of a phone, but I certainly remember days coming home from like football practice in high school and getting about one sock on before just falling over and calling it good.
Okay, well, I'll take this next one since we're a little off track here.
Okay.
Single core CPU cracked post-quantum encryption candidate algorithm in just an hour. This is from the Hacker News, provided by Londoner. A late-stage candidate encryption algorithm that was meant to withstand decryption by powerful quantum computers in the future has been trivially cracked by using a computer running Intel Xeon CPU in an hour's time. The algorithm in question is SYKE, short for Supersingular Isogeny Key Encapsulation, which made it to the fourth round of the post-quantum cryptography standardization process by the U.S. Department of Commerce's National Institute of Standards and Technology. So I'm wondering how this single-core computer just shredded this algorithm.
Can't really say, but that's a little disconcerting. I think that you're trying to future-proof for these quantum computing attacks, and you got a standard x86 core that can crack it in an hour.
Took about 62 minutes on a single core computer.
But I read that there are new encryption methods actively developed explicitly with the quantum computers in mind, to make them resistant to cracking back at quantum computers.
I think all of this is going to change once quantum computing gets in the hands of more people.
That might be 10 plus years away still.
Yeah.
I was looking to see if there was anything else in the article that I could, add. There really isn't. I guess someone created an algorithm that they were hoping was quantum computer proof, and then it looked like it was, and then somebody found a way to crack the algorithm using a single core computer in an hour.
Right. That was going to be my next question. How did they create this algorithm? Did they do that on a regular computer and then just assume because of the way the math worked that it was quantum?
Well, they're going to have to just, that's what they have to do right now because there aren't really any quantum computers. Yeah. So you create it on a regular computer and you try and forward think enough to create something that is quantum computer proof, which seems unlikely. And
It
then
does.
things like this happen.
Yeah, inevitably mistakes will be made.
Yeah.
I mean, from my point of view, it seems like trying to get on, I don't know, what did we have back in the day? Like get on the Apple IIc and create something that we think is going to work on a PC that we use nowadays. I'm not saying it's not worthwhile, but I'm saying by the time any of this stuff becomes mainstream, it's going to be completely different from anything that we might try to predict ahead of time.
Yeah,
Well, I
think
know that
anything within technology, the initial attempts are usually crude.
Terrible. We've always been terrible. I mean, it's all fun in games, really. It's just a lot of fun, I think, to try to predict the direction technology goes. But we are almost always way, way off base. I mean, nobody could have predicted 30 years ago where we would be at right now. When I was in school for sys management, in the early 2000s, none of this cloud stuff existed, and nobody was predicting anything like this at the time. In fact, they were predicting strange things like operating systems being hard coded onto hardware. So we're clearly terrible at predicting the direction of technology.
Oh yeah, go back and watch some of those sci-fi films from the 70s and look at the computers that they had on the spaceships, quote unquote, there. And
Yeah. No, people in the 60s and 70s assuming that computers were still going to take up, whole rooms.
right.
Yeah. I mean, we can't even get the wardrobes right, let alone the technology.
to
Oh,
quote
parachute pants will come back. Don't worry.
God, I
Reflective
hope not.
colors.
to quote a Rush song, our great computers fill our hollowed holes. But I mean, maybe they just assumed that computers would stay the same size because they would just get more and more powerful while staying the same size. I mean, if you look at the supercomputers nowadays, they still are like they still take up an
Enormous.
entire
Yeah.
or like an entire warehouse. So they weren't wrong. I think because they just
Well,
assumed what the most powerful computers would be like, and in
there,
that
there
way they weren't wrong.
there's documentation of some very smart people saying that they never thought that there would be a computer in everybody's house,
I didn't
let
think
alone
that
one that you could
20
pick
years
up.
ago or 30 years
Or
ago.
a calculator in everyone's pockets.
That seems to
Well,
be kind of
no,
on a peak and curve, though, the computer in everybody's houses thing. It seems like nowadays you've got computers and people like us. And then everybody else, had a computer in the 90s and early 2000s so they can get on AOL. And then the minute the phones came out, they ditched the laptops. That's certainly true of everybody else in my family and most of my friends that I haven't bullied onto Linux yet.
yeah, I do know a lot of people whose entire interaction with the world is through their phone as opposed to through a computer.
Because that's what they were using the PC for, was to take part in the chat rooms and, the instant messages and all that stuff. And
Now they can do all of that through
the phone, and it's actually a more simple, arguably, although I don't, arguably more reliable interface.
Yeah, that's not inherently a bad thing. That
No,
they can do anything on a phone.
not really. But I mean, it's gone a few directions that, we probably couldn't have predicted, 20, 30 years ago.
I mean, technology is getting easier to use, so people don't need as much knowledge to use it. But it's the same thing as you could say that our ancestors hundreds of years ago had to know agriculture. They had to grow
Yeah.
their own food. Now we don't have to grow our own food. So with technology going forward, knowledge being lost in the general population is a given. I mean, it's something that just inevitable at some
Yeah,
point.
it's normal. It's interesting though.
It's like when people Linux power users make the argument that people using ready to use distributions out of the box without even having to compile their own kernel, they are not real computer users or something like that. But people who want to manage their own system are a majority. I mean, we people who want to even talk about a piece of software, we are a minority. Did I say majority for the first time?
I don't think so, but we got your point, and you're right, because we people that listen to
We are a minority.
podcasts about technology and how okay, so we're in a niche where we not only want to have access to technology, but we want to understand how it works, how to make it get the most out of it, and how to control it, and if need be, how to come up with something, an alternative of sorts. And
Okay, let me say an example. It's in order to use Windows, you don't necessarily have to know how Windows works internally, but it's still good if you can open up Task Manager, look at the processes running, and if you have enough knowledge about what is supposed to be there to spot something that maybe isn't supposed to be there, like a malicious process running in the background.
right.
So I guess it's just in a way just well I was going to say common sense, but like something that you pick up while you're using technology. It's like how we are even subconsciously able to recognize a web address that might be suspicious, and without even saying that, without even being able to tell why it's suspicious.
Yeah, I think common sense is a relative thing because, like you described, seeing a URL that might be suspicious, that might be common for the four of us and
Okay,
people.
I mean, I'm not done. Mean general common sense, but
Right.
common
No, I
sense
know.
within a given field, if there's such a thing.
Yeah, because
So
and
common
that's
sense
why
combined with knowledge of a given field.
I try to share as much as I can because that whole thing with bogus URLs and all that is getting bigger and bigger all the time, and it's we are the kind of people we can recognize that when we see it, and as such, I almost feel it's incumbent upon us to share that information with people that might not understand that what they're looking at might be something bogus.
Like trackers in the URL after the question
Yeah,
mark.
yeah.
I had someone send me a link a few days ago, and true enough, it had a tracker in the link. But I think Firefox nowadays just removes that by default.
Yeah, there's some drama about that.
Facebook encrypted their
Yeah.
trackers so that it can't be removed at all.
Well, then somebody's going to come up with some kind of decrypting engine to run
But that
through.
means that Facebook thinks that, I mean, what is the market share of Firefox right now?
Apparently enough for Facebook to come up with an encrypting algorithm to.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, because I assumed like 80% of people are using Chrome.
Yeah, that's what I would have thought, or Edge, but Firefox comes out with this announcement, and then Facebook goes through the effort of encrypting URLs. I didn't even know that was possible,
Yeah.
but there you go.
So as much as it pains me to say this, I assume that the Firefox user base right now isn't big enough for Facebook to even care and implement a countermeasure to that. But because the fact that they did what they did proves that Firefox still has a substantial influence.
And they must have worked that out to a specific dollar amount, or at least a estimated dollar amount, in order to get in order to get the company to devote the resources, unless it was just so easy for them to do that it didn't even bear mentioning. But yeah, like you said, it must be Firefox users must represent a big enough base that it was worthwhile for them to make the effort.
Yeah, that was quite a tangent from the topic of quantum computing.
It was, but what do we know about quantum computing anyway?
Well, and I can recognize a quantum computer as long as it looks like it's supposed to, I guess.
With a keyboard and a monitor, and not like a thing to hook directly into your brain.
So the quantum computers that I've seen in pictures that look like sort of like a chandelier or something.
Yeah.
If someone has seen the TV show Devs, which I recommend, it's yeah, they have one in that. All right. DuckDuckGo rolls out new Microsoft blockers after backlash. This is from TechRadar. In late June, researchers discovered that DuckDuckGo's mobile browser permitted Microsoft's trackers to operate while blocking those of Google and Facebook. In a blog post, the company's CEO and founder, Gabriel Weinberg, sought to clarify the issue and set out a series of improvements. The third-party tracker scripts from Microsoft are now blocked from loading across DuckDuckGo's browsing apps, iOS and Android, and browser extensions Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Edge, and Opera. Weinberg further explained how the company was limited in applying its third-party tracker protection program on Microsoft's tracking scripts due to a policy requirement related to DuckDuckGo's use of Bing as a source for search results. The company seems to have ditched the requirement in the meantime. And there's a quote, "We are glad this is no longer the case," the CEO said. "We have not had and do not have any similar limitation with any other company." In a separate note shared with TechRadar Pro, the company explained it believes the issues were blown out of proportion. Well, let me say it right out the bat that, well, they weren't blocking Microsoft's trackers, and they didn't make that clear to users. So most people, all people, were going to DuckDuckGo and using their browsers because they had the impression that it was blocking everything. And because they weren't made aware of that, I don't think it was blown out of proportion.
Yeah, I think the transparency aspect is the thing that people had a problem with, probably more so than the actual tracking. The limited tracking that was in there was that they just weren't upfront about it to begin with.
I started hearing buzz about this like a month or two ago, and it's still, at that time, my thought was, well, it's still better than everything else, with the exception of just running Firefox proper, which is what I do. But I had friends that were using the DuckDuckGo browser, and I was a little disturbed by it. But yeah, looking back, I think the only reason it bothered me at all is that somebody had to catch them out on this. They weren't real forthcoming with it. And then immediately, the default reaction is to try to minimize it. Yeah, well, we're still better than everything else, Yeah, but
yeah, and I think there's a little bit of arrogance there too. Like if you read that last part of the quote where they're saying, they believe it was blown out of proportion. It's like, maybe you don't need to say that.
Well, yeah, because that's an opinion.
Right.
That's an opinion, because people are using DuckDuckGo because they don't want to be a part of all of this mass information being fed into the engine, and then for it to just come out and say, yeah, well, DuckDuckGo is giving this information to one of the biggest culprits, the biggest sinners in that space, period.
It's also important to note that this doesn't affect their search engine. It's just their browser,
the mobile browser.
But in a way, it's not that surprising, because Mozilla, for example, is mostly funded by Google, and in return, Google is kept as a default search engine in Firefox. And because DuckDuckGo is getting their search results from Bing, in a way it makes sense that Microsoft would want something in return. I've been trying out various search aggregators like Cirx and Google and Start. Well, yeah, I think Startpage is the same, that pull results from either Bing or Google or just Google. And I found a bunch of Cirx instances and Google instances that were rate limited by Google because a lot of people were using them. Because those are not official and those are not endorsed by Google, but because DuckDuckGo is officially they have permission from Microsoft to get their search results, it makes sense that Microsoft would want something in return.
And
I
remind me, what is
this-
the DuckDuckGo browser based on?
I
Chrome?
don't think that, I'm not sure about
That's
that.
a Chromium-based browser. You guessed it, kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
So-
because Chromium is open source, I don't think that's relevant to the tracking.
But what do you got to have in order to get on the internet with a Chromium-based browser?
What do you mean?
Don't you have to have all of Google's APIs and all that to?
No,
access?
because there's ungoogled Chromium, which doesn't have anything that goes back to Google, and it still works.
Well, is that what DuckDuckGo is based on, though, or is it just based on?
No, but I assume but it's the same with Brave and Vivaldi.
Okay.
Because when Google takes Chromium and turns it into Chrome, they add a bunch of stuff on top of that. Chromium itself, the Chromium browser still has some Google API stuff in it, but the forks of Chromium don't necessarily need to have that or have to have that, I think, like Brave or even the DuckDuckGo browser.
I think the question is, does Chromium have to access any proprietary and hidden bits in order to get on the internet? I mean, is that even clear?
I don't see why that would have to be a thing. Because the internet in its foundation is the internet itself is built on open technologies.
Okay.
Mostly.
Well, and I think coming back around to DuckDuckGo, they had the endorsement of the EFF behind them too. So I think they're held to a little bit of a higher standard. A lot of people trust the EFF. So, yeah, I just think all around this just wasn't a real good look for them.
I try to give some of these projects the benefit of the doubt, though, in reality, because sometimes people go into open source not really having a fantastic idea of how things are interpreted by the community. A big example of that is when Audacity was acquired by Muse Group, and the way they worded some of the changes they were looking to make, they just were not accustomed to the way the community reacts to some of these things, and then the way the community reacts when information is brought out that the company wasn't immediately forthcoming with, and then the choices you might make in terms of what technologies you're using on the back end, which you might not think is a big deal, but the community has a long, well-defined opinion about, and I don't know that I think DuckDuckGo has always been real good at being privacy and security conscious, but as far as like the way certain other niche communities might interpret some of the things they do, I don't know. It's just another story about a company not being well prepared for the way things are received, I think.
And speaking about Audacity, a lot of people made the argument back then that the outcry from the community was also blown out of proportion. But I would make the counter argument that because they said that the changes weren't as bad as some people said they were, but maybe the reason that the changes weren't that bad was the result of a small part of the community being vocal about not liking the changes. So maybe it wasn't blown out of proportion, because if it wasn't blown out of because if there was no outcry, the changes would have been way worse.
Right. I mean, this is your community. This is who you're catering to. So you better have a finger on the pulse and read the room a little bit before you venture into the waters, right? I mean,
Yeah, well, I mean, an experienced open source project with experienced open source developers would understand that they would do their development out in the open. They would do all of their, I don't know if the research and all that, if it's appropriate to say the research should be done out in the open, but when it comes to making huge decisions, you do that in the open. You value the community's input on these things. And what the mistake I think that some of these companies make is they make these huge decisions, they chuck it over the wall, and then they don't really even say, "Hey, we did this thing." Somebody in the community sees and comments on this thing being changed, and then it's interpreted as a change that was made that a company is trying to hide or is trying to secretly make. It's almost the feeling you get is that the community almost interprets that as decisions being made in spite of the opinions of the community itself. So it takes somebody that understands how an open source community interprets things and reacts to things to have a direct involvement with the decision process, or at least the communication process.
Yeah. You mentioned the EFF. I know it stands for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Are they also open source advocates? Because I don't really know anything about them.
yeah, they have a website, and I'd suggest taking a look at it. They do a lot for the open source community.
I know about the Free Software Foundation. So compared to that, what was the difference between them and the Electronic Frontier Foundation?
Oh goodness, probably couldn't really do a short synopsis on that. I would say just take a look at the website and look around. But
we could do an innards in the future episode about the various foundations and organizations that support free software. That would be an interesting topic.
In some cases, it just comes down to the projects that they back.
Like the Free Software Foundation, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and even the Linux. Is it called the Linux Foundation?
Oops. EFF, Digital Freedom. Leo's commenting. EFF, Digital Freedom. FSF, Software Freedom. Okay. So, yeah, there's some delineation going on there. So it's, EFF is for a little bit more than the software.
So probably the privacy and the user data side of things.
Yeah, and not necessarily the software, just like the entire content, the entire digital content. Period.
For example, how Signal, the Signal Messenger, is centralized but still very private. So something doesn't have to be completely decentralized and fully community maintained in order to be private.
That's a good point.
Privacy respecting.
Yeah. Because it depends on the thing that the software is doing, whether or not it would work better to be centralized or decentralized. I think the EFF is one of the big backers of some of the projects that you see on F-Droid. Oh, gee whiz. Okay.
I just realized that we are going on tangent after tangent here.
Well, we got a short.
I mean, these are great discussions.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it in a negative way. Linux 6.0 adding runtime verification for running on safety critical systems. This is from Alex. Linux developer Daniel Bristol de Oliveira has been exploring runtime verification for Linux in the past few years, and the implementation is set to be mainlined as part of the tracking updates in this next kernel. He summed up this feature as, quote, "Over the last years, I've been exploring the possibility of verifying the Linux kernel behavior using runtime verification. Runtime verification, or RV, is a lightweight yet rigorous method that complements classical exhaustive verification techniques such as model checking and theorem proving with a more practical approach for complex systems. Instead of relying on a fine-grained model of a system, for example, a re-implementation of a instruction level, RV works by analyzing the trace of the system's actual execution, comparing it against a formal specification of the system behavior. The usage of deterministic automation for RV is a well-established approach. In the specific case of the Linux kernel, you can check how to model complex behavior of the Linux kernel with this paper. And he also added a TLDR, which says it is possible to model complex behaviors in a modular way with an acceptable overhead, even for production systems. So I'd like to think that I understood most of this, but I might be lying. But basically, this is just trying to model things to be able to monitor process execution in a more efficient way.
This is a little bit above my pay grade.
Yeah.
Well,
So I think it's something like the CPU mitigations, but on a more higher level, on the kernel level.
I think it's part of the push. There's been some additions to the kernel to make it more real time too. And I think a lot of that's going to come out in the...
By real time, you mean low latency?
Well, I think you've got low latency, and I think you've got wham now, click, point, click, boom, it's there. And there's going to be a lot of real time stuff going into the 6 dot whatever kernel when it comes out. And I'm wondering if this has a lot to do with that, because it seems like really low level stuff that might improve our ability to move to more towards a more real time.
I have a friend who is doing their PhD right now in computer science. They might be able to comment more on this.
Yeah.
And that's all for. Does anyone have anything to add to this?
Nope.
All right. And that's all for security and privacy. Let's move on to our bi-weekly wanderings. Bill?
Well, yeah, work's not been much fun for the last couple of weeks. The last 2 Mondays I've taken off for 2 different reasons from work, that is. The Tuesday before last, I took off from Fort Wayne with a small load of copper for Trenton, New Jersey. This was supposed to be a rather gravy, or easy, as we say, run, given how small the load was and how easy the customer was to get to. Normally, when we take off with a load of copper, it's for that type of customer, it's 11 skids, and the payload weight, or the freight weight, is about 44,000 pounds, plus the weight of the truck and trailer. It's about 80,000 pounds in my case, which is fine, but you lose some speed going up and down the hills. You got to do a little bit of shifting and all that. This particular customer only gets 3 or 4 skids, which is so little weight that it's almost like going all the way out there empty, which is kind of like a day off, just driving, listening to music. And well, anyway, when I got about 100 miles into Pennsylvania, which is about 6 hours into the trip, I started to hear a strange sound coming from the transmission. The sound got progressively louder, and to make a rather long and boring story short, I was forced to take refuge in the nearest truck stop, which was a Sapp Brothers at the 120-mile marker in Pennsylvania on I-80. After calling the boss, the decision was made to send a replacement truck on a lowboy trailer, which basically meant I was stuck in that truck stop from 3:30 that afternoon to about 1 o'clock the next day, when, I don't know, he showed up at about 11 o'clock, but it takes a couple hours to get one truck off and get all my stuff moved into it and then back my truck onto it. We had to remove the stacks, the exhaust stacks from the side, because sitting on that trailer, they're at about 1310, and you can only 13 foot 10 inches, and you can only be 13 feet 6 inches legally going down the road without a special permit. And then you would have to be routed by Department of Transportation, which costs a lot of money. So we took the stacks off, and by the time we got done with that, I got out of there. In reality, I think it was about 2:00 in the afternoon by the time I got out. And then I headed off to Trenton. I didn't actually get delivered until that next morning. And of course, when I got back, I found out the boss sent the truck to the Kenworth dealer to get a new transmission put in it. And at this point right now, as we record, I'm still without my truck. And I won't get it back until Tuesday night when I get back from Cape Girardeau, Missouri, which is where I'm taking off for tomorrow as we record.
I assume it must legitimately feel like a part of you is missing.
So the machine is the extension of the man.
Yeah. How long have you been driving this same truck?
5.5 years in the same truck, which is actually pretty substantial. When we bought the truck, well, he bought the truck for me. That's the way I choose to interpret it, because the people he buys trucks off of, they work kind of like drug dealers. They bring trucks, they'll get a truck that they've got for sale, and they'll bring it and they'll just park it in his yard just to, hey, we got this thing. And then he looks at it and decides if he wants it and then buys it. And in this case, I remember I saw the truck, and then I commented to him that this was a kind of truck that I've always wanted ever since I was young, and I've never gotten one. And so he bought it and he gave it to me. And so, nobody's ever done anything like that for me before. So it kind of gave me this emotional attachment to the doggone thing. When he bought it, it had 700,000 miles on it, which sounds like a lot, but for a truck, an over-the-road truck, that's about...
Anyway, you look at it, that's still a hell of a gift.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I've made him rich, so it's we've gotten an equal value proposition out of it. But when you've been in a truck that long, you've moved all your stuff into it, and you've gotten used to that particular workflow. And I've got like a desk layout in that thing where I've got my laptop and I'm able to do stuff. I could actually even film a show from the cab of that truck if I had to. And that being said,
I want to see that one of these times.
Yeah. That'll be unfortunate if we do, but yeah, it would be interesting. It would all rely on LTE technology, because my phone, all the internet comes from my phone, and I don't have a 5G phone. So, I mean, it is what it is. But I mean, that caused a problem with this week's episode, because originally our topic for this week was supposed to be a start of a series of episodes focused on penetration testing distributions. And we were going to start with Kali Linux. And I had like a whole plan of YouTube videos and websites that I was going to do all my research on. And I was going to become a proper Kali hacker. And I was going to stream a virtual machine of Kali while we were talking about that. But I just wasn't able to do the research during the week because I didn't have my truck has like a fold out desk where I can put the laptop and the mouse and all that. And then the truck I had to use, I didn't have all that. So I just wasn't able to do any of that research. So I was completely unprepared. And that's why we've got this 100% improv topic that we're going to talk about in the innards today. So
it'll probably be the shortest section today.
Might be, yeah. Anyway,
tested the spam and it still works.
Pen testing.
It's
Get it, kids?
really low hanging fruit. The first time when I heard a friend saying that he's using Debian testing, that was the first time I heard about Debian testing. I assumed that it was a penetration testing branch of Debian, but no, it's just the testing branch. But yeah, in case someone doesn't know what pen testing means, it's basically cybersecurity penetration testing. Kali has a bunch of tools pre-installed for things like that, and because of that, a lot of hackers like to use it.
And the more I got into this, the more I got to thinking, I wonder what the ratio is between hackers and actual pen testers is, because you couldn't make a distribution like Kali and say this is the hackers distribution. We got hacker software on there, which it absolutely does, but that's just my opinion. There is a lot to it, and I want to be able to, when we come out with this series of shows, I want to be able to have real informed content to go by. So I didn't think it would be a good idea to get started until we did. So we went ahead and postponed that. Anyway, so that's all for work. Now, moving forward to some of the tech issues I've been dealing with. When I came home this week, I did my relatively routine ZFS scrub on the Nextcloud server, which, for anybody that doesn't know, that our mintCast has a Nextcloud server, which we don't use very much, but I've got it up and running and ready to take the place of our Google Drive to start managing all of our cloud-based storage. And it runs fine, but it's running on a Rock Pro 64, which is for anybody that doesn't know, is a single board. It's a single board, kind of like a Raspberry Pi, except it's a little bit more niche. So it doesn't have an official foundation behind it, making software and operating system as such. And the most official thing you can get for it is Debian. They make it. Well, there's Armbian for it too, but the most low level distribution you can get for it is Debian. And so I've got that installed, and then I installed Nextcloud on it the hard way, and it's fine. But every now and then it just seems to screw up whenever I try to run any kind of RAID on it. When I was using ButterFS and I was using native ButterFS RAID, it was screwing up. It was causing a lot of errors. And with ButterFS, it doesn't self-heal the way ZFS does. So I switched to ZFS, and it was not a problem really until recently. The second of the two hard drives in the mirror started getting a lot of errors, and then it wasn't able to recover from them. And so I detached that drive from the array and then resilvered it and reattached it, and now it's not a mirror anymore. It's a striped ZFS array. I'm just about through with this thing. I think my next big computer purchase is going to be a proper x86 server to run our Nextcloud on, because I think if ever we're going to switch to it and start using it and start taking it seriously, it needs to be something that we can rely on, and I'm just not comfortable with its ability to keep data secure. So I can't read that.
No, I'm just trying to get my webcam to lower the brightness.
You need to turn the light on that room.
It's just a blank paper.
It's
sort of working.
There you go.
Yep. Let's hope it stays like that.
It's going to crank back up, though. I bet you. We'll see.
It is doing that, yeah.
It's too bad we don't have, granular controls over these webcams as to, the brightness and all that stuff,
Webcams are one of those things in computing that seem to be not as great as they should be, like how printing is sometimes a pain.
Printing is evil, and we should all do what we can to get away from it. So yeah, that's what I'm dealing with the Nextcloud server. It's working, but it's not mirrored anymore, and so I'm going to be more diligent at keeping more regular ZFS send receive backups of it to make sure that we don't lose anything. Okay, so I ran Mint upgrade right before the show, and as we record right now, I'm running on Mint 21, and everything seems to be working fine, with the exception of Chrome and Chromium, which was absolutely unusable after the upgrade, and I'm still not sure why. After the upgrade, Chrome was hanging every time I would click on anything, not just the web page, but any of the controls in the UI. It would just hang for several seconds between the time that I would click on it and the time it would respond. So everything we're doing right now is running through Firefox, which I don't have a real problem with. I would actually prefer it that way. It's just that when it comes to podcasting and when you're using all the tools, all the Google tools on the back end, Chrome is a little easier to use for all that stuff. But it's not a deal breaker by any means. But that's pretty much all I've got going on. The like I said, the update has been without drama. And when it restarted and came back, oh yeah, I did have to rearrange. I've got a 3 monitor set up here in front of me right now, and I did have to rearrange in the display settings where these monitors were at, but that's almost a non-issue.
I think they even changed how this display setup works. I think they were using something else, and now they are using what GNOME is using. So maybe it didn't remember because the way the displays are set up has changed.
Would that be part of the window manager?
Not sure.
Yeah,
I think
it makes sense.
It's separate. I think it's on the DX or server level or something like that.
Okay, but that was almost a non-issue. I just went into the display settings and then rearranged the monitor layout, and it was back to normal, and it's working fine. There's not a lot. I mean, there's no like real shocking user interface changes that I'm aware of, except now I've got a Bluetooth icon down in my tray. I use the cinnamon version, by the way, and there's the Bluetooth, but it's not even enabled, so I might at some point get rid of that. But yeah, that's all I've got. How about you, Joe?
Oh boy, get your fast forward ready. Well, I got a lot done with the Bluetooth devices that I was improving. I ruined a few, learning how to do things. I know a lot of the crew watched my frustrations last Saturday and probably didn't understand why I was putting myself through that. But much like when you reach a plateau in weightlifting, you need to stretch your other skills in order to advance yourself. So I think I completely ruined like 2 of those little boards. One that I discussed last time where I used too much heat on the board, and one where I got the iron a little too close to a resistor and it came off the board. It was so small that I could not figure out how to reattach it. But those 2 failures left me with a board for measuring the 3D prints and experience on how to do things on the board in the future.
And these are these Bluetooth receivers, right? That you can plug something into.
Yeah, they were Bluetooth headsets. No, the only thing I plug into them is MMCX. They're Bluetooth headsets, and I added larger batteries, MMCX, different buttons, and a new casing. I mean, were you there on Saturday when I was working on it? Yeah, okay. I have one that I put together with that the team watched most of the process for. It was very slow, and I got a little frustrated while trying to attach the new buttons. I also found out how difficult it was to attach the buttons to the casing when everything else was in the way. It showed me that I needed to keep the wires for the buttons shorter so that they don't get in the way, and that the pegs on the buttons would need to be trimmed or they could easily short each other out. This one went together and there was an end product, but the buttons were not seated correctly, and the volume up button is shorted to the power button. And so I have two power play buttons and a volume down button. It has a small problem with overheating, and that needed to be compensated for in the next build. This also taught me the order to do things in regards to the overall build. I also learned that in this case, it was better to use a slightly thicker wire for the buttons instead of the 0.01 millimeter wire that I was using. I switched to some of the headphone wire that I had handy, and it worked a lot better and much faster with much less frustration. The 3D design was modified to provide more access to the mic and to put a gap between the top of the board and the casing. That was to provide a little bit of airflow so that it didn't overheat. I also soldered to the pegs on the buttons first and then glued the buttons into place, which is then a 2-hour wait. Then measure and pull through the MMCX cables and tie the knot so that they're the correct length, and solder those cables into place so that they don't interfere with the sidewall when in position. Once the buttons are dried, I can solder the wires, the trailing wires, to the buttons on the board and solder the battery into place as well. Move everything into position in the casing, which is a tight fit with all the wires and the oversized battery. Test everything to make sure that it works as it should, and then glue on the back, which is another 2 hours. Then once the back is glued on, you can glue the shirt clip to the back, which is, once again, another 2 hours. That's the best order because of the clamping and the various angles. The last one that I did with the last board left came out really good, with each button working as it should and the overall sound quality excellent. The mic on these devices leaves a little bit to be desired, but what can you really expect for a $4 device? In the end, there isn't much I would change about the final product, except that I would want something that does not need to be completely glued together. Right now, it lacks repairability when things go wrong. I can cut the device apart and pull all the usable parts out and reprint the casing, but that's definitely not ideal, especially when it comes to the buttons, because they're glued directly to the casing.
It's just like the previous laptop that I had to glue together because it was falling apart.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of keyboard or a lot of laptops, when you take them apart, they got those plastic pegs that hold the keyboard into place. So if your keyboard goes bad, you have to replace it. You got to find another way to stick it up there and make it fit right.
This laptop, it's one of those two-in-ones that you can fold in out of 360 degrees, but it's also had a plastic casing. So the plastic, these drives that the screws go into had to be glued, factory glued onto the plastic casing. And when those come off, there's not really a good way to put those together back. So my new laptop has a aluminum. I think it's aluminum chassis. So I don't expect that to happen.
Okay. I may order more of the Pulse headsets so I can do a full write-up of the entire process with images each step of the way, or do a proper YouTube video of the entire process. But I also picked up 6 more Bluetooth headsets, this time for $3.25 each. But they have a different design and a different layout. I don't necessarily like where the mic position is, but it's still the same concept. This time I want to 3D design a modular system to just easily switch out batteries and connectors. I have all of these lower capacity batteries from the previous build, plus a few more of the higher capacity batteries left, although they're older and I don't know how long they'll work for. I also want to be able to quickly switch between 3.5 millimeter and MMCX. I think I could also add pass-through charging, which would make it a much more useful in like a car, especially if you have the 3.5 on there. Modular would also allow for future upgrades. I'm thinking of ways to use some of the retractable headsets that I have on a build like this. I think it would make it a little bit bulkier than I want, but yeah. Moving away from Bluetooth devices, I know not everyone likes to hear about the hardware that I like working on, but I enjoy it, and some people seem to like it. A listener to a couple of my other shows sent me a device to work on that they didn't have the patience to finish. This is a Pi Zero Game Boy mod. It was called the Zega Mame Boy. I loved working on it, and I did get to try it out, but there's like a hard short there, and I'll do a full write up on it probably for the next show because I got done working on it like Friday afternoon, so not much time to put all the information here. But needless to say, there is a hard short on it, and I'm not sure if it's the Zega board or the Pi Zero, but those two are, stuck together with solder and pins and very hard to separate. So I'm probably going to try to remove it, but it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. I have at least temporarily converted my middle child to Linux Mint. Her laptop hard drive died, and when I replaced it, I was entirely too lazy to download Windows, but I had Mint ready to go, so that is what she has on it for now. On that one, I also needed to replace the battery, and that's just, a throw money at it type of problem. She hasn't had any complaints about the device yet, and she is currently using the device to sign up for her first semester of college. So, yeah. And I already talked about the Zega MAME. So, Norbert, what have you been up to?
Well, I sort of had to fix my sleep schedule. At the end of June, at the end of the exam period, my sleep schedule was way out of sync with what it was supposed to be, and I was going to bed and waking up way later than I should have. And there was a weekend at the somewhere in July when I woke up late but still felt very tired because I haven't been sleeping a lot in the previous weeks. So I just decided to go back to sleep. And I wake up again sometime during the day, and I went back to sleep again. And I slept like 10 plus hours. And I woke up in the afternoon. And I said to myself, well, if I keep having these 28-hour days, then after 2 or 3 days, I should be going back around to waking up when I should. So the next day, then I stayed awake at night and then went to sleep the next day, and I woke up around 8 p.m. So I stayed awake the next night, and the next day I woke up around sometime around midnight. And in this way, I managed to get to a point when I was waking up at 6 a.m. And I thought, but the thing is that after not having a lot of sleep for a couple of weeks or maybe even a month, getting like 10 plus hours of sleep for 2 or 3 days in a row somehow made me feel even more tired and less rested. I guess my body was just trying to get used to actually getting enough rest again. And it's been a couple of weeks. I keep feeling better. It's still not, I still don't feel perfectly rested, but I think you're supposed to be able to get enough rest in like 2 weeks. So maybe a couple of days, and I will be well. I mean, I don't feel sick or something. I just feel myself getting tired after being awake a lot less than I used to. But it's getting better. On the tech side of things, I installed uBlock Origin for Firefox, which is an ad blocker plus tracker blocker. And somehow I managed to go all these years without ever installing any ad blocker or tracker blocker in my browser. And I've heard in many places that uBlock Origin is sort of the golden standard for ad and tracker blocking for Firefox nowadays. So I installed it, and I started using it with the default settings, and in some websites, I kept seeing the badge on the icon, the number of trackers blocked, the number just crawling up. And after having YouTube or Discord open for like a couple of hours, it even reaches the three digit uh, heights. And I just you can even see the websites that the trackers is blocking, and I was just shocked that to see that. I knew that websites have a lot of trackers, but I kind of underestimated their numbers. So then I started to look into a bit into tracker blocking, and I came across a couple of websites, and I came across a couple of YouTube channels. One of them is TechLore, and the other one is The New Oil. And I found a podcast that they do together called Surveillance Report each week, which is basically like our security segment, but on steroids. They have a 30 or 40 plus minute podcast each week, all about security and privacy. They cover like new research in security, data breaches, and malware and hacks and stuff like that. So it's a really uh, so I it's the best resource I found so far in this field. So if someone wants to be up to date with security and privacy related news, I can really recommend that. And I also found another podcast called Opt Out, run by a guy called Set for Privacy. He sits down with various people who are working in with projects related to security and privacy. For example, projects like Nextcloud or Bitwarden, to people who are involved in various cryptocurrencies. And it's a really easy to understand both of these podcasts, as well the two channels I mentioned, Techlore and The New Oil. I found this to be really good resources for someone who is just getting started with uh, getting into privacy and security and how things work. So I can recommend all these four resources. I've been listening to a bunch of episodes of The New Oil specifically, and there have been a lot of great discussions with people around the world. So, and I also found a couple of videos on Techlore about Android ROMs, and I started looking into reading up on Calyx OS and Graphene OS, because I've always just used the stock Android ROM that came with my phone, and even if I wanted, I shouldn't put a custom ROM on my current phone, which is an LG G7, because of specifically the hardware, this quad deck that it uses for audio playback via wired headphones. The firmware for it just doesn't work on any custom firmware at all, but it's still interesting. Specifically Calyx OS, which only seems to support Pixel devices right now, and I think it has a sort of a sandboxed implementation of Google Play services. So it allows you to download apps from the Play Store, but not grant all the permissions to Google Play services that it usually has on the regular Android ROM. And I realized okay. And I also decided to try ProtonMail. Did I already cover it in a previous show? ProtonMail? Or just at the end of the show?
I don't think so. I think you mentioned it to us somehow or another, but I don't remember you talking about
Yeah, I think I mentioned it in one of the announcements at the end of a show. Every time Moss at the end of each show, when Moss reads his email address, I keep thinking how much I kept thinking I really like how ProtonMail gives people the ability to have @pm.me emails, because I really like how short and easy to understand and easy to remember that is. And I wanted to have a new email address that is very short. So I decided to subscribe to ProtonMail. I think I mentioned that when we were talking about our
You actually get the @ProtonMail and the @pm.me
No,
in it.
Yeah. I think you get that you get those in the free version as well.
Yeah,
But
you
now,
do.
since they
I've got 'em.
changed their branding, they also have the proton.me. And not just the protonmail.com. So you can have a proton.me and you can have the same address with an @pm.me
Yeah,
for free.
that's what I've got.
But in the premium one, but in the premium subscription, you get to have 10 extra. You get to have up to 10 different email aliases, which all are tied to your single one, to your one inbox. So I decided to create a couple of ones so I can have a personal and I can have another email that I use, which I use on services like GitHub and the like. So far I'm really satisfied with ProtonMail. You even get to have you even get to have a custom domain with the regular premium subscription. I don't have the domain yet, but I might take advantage of that in the future. I also, and speaking of Firefox, I also did some customizing. I may have mentioned this before, but I just got rid of the bookmarks bar because I realized I don't really use it that often. So I just have a single folder icon that I can have for my most important bookmarks. And I found a way to merge the tab bar and the address bar into one single row. So I went from the browser having three bars, three rows, like the tab layer, the address bar, and the bookmarks, to just have one single row for all of those. And it gives you so much free space. Actually, I think I mentioned this 2 shows ago. Yeah. And while I was watching a video on the previously mentioned channel, so eventually I want to move as many of my services that I use to. So in addition to moving to ProtonMail, I also found a website called justdeleteme.xyz. And what it is a list of online services, and it ranks them based on how easy it is or how hard it is to delete your unused account on those services. And I came across this website by watching a course on the TechLore channel. They have a course of, I think it's like 50 videos, which it goes through how you can improve your online privacy and security. And one of those steps is to delete all your unused accounts, because the more accounts you have, the more likely that one of them might be caught up in a data breach. Or yeah, and he listed a resource, which is this website, justdeleteme.xyz, and it's just a lot, and it's just a huge list of various services. The main point is that it ranks them based on how hard it is to remove your account, but it is also good for reminding you of various accounts that you might have, because you might not remember all of the websites that you signed up for. But if you just go through this list and you come across services that you have but might have forgotten, it just reminds you. So I started going through that and deleting my accounts. And I don't think I have much else to say. I also tried to, on the Linux side of things, I also tried to move away from apps that don't support Wayland to apps that do support Wayland. But when I moved from the Discord client to the web version, the client itself doesn't run on Wayland because it's using an outdated version of Electron. And even when I explicitly tried to pass an argument to Discord to tell it to use Wayland, it has a bug, and that bug is specific to that old version of Electron that Discord is using. So, but in the browser version, I kept having weird connection errors, which are not happening in the desktop client version. So I just went back to using the desktop client. And I also started using Element and the Matrix messaging more. And I realized that their desktop client, also doesn't run on Wayland by default. And I think I also didn't manage to get that to work properly. But it is using the most recent version of Electron, which is interesting. And yeah, that's what I wanted to say. So, Josh?
All right. Well, I don't have a whole lot to report on here, but last Sunday, woke up to some good news. Linux Mint 21 had been released. So once I got out of bed and got a little coffee going, I did a nuke and pave on my main desktop machine. I used Timeshift to take a quick snapshot and then copied my home folder contents onto an external SATA M.2 drive. The install went just as easily as all previous had been, with no issues to speak of. Like any version of Mint, it was just a piece of cake. And after transferring over all of my files and redoing my configurations, I was back to a seemingly unchanged desktop experience. Took a few hours at most. So I haven't had much time this week to spend on the computer, so I haven't had a chance to fully explore the changes in Mint 21 yet, but functionality seems to be largely unchanged. With the little free time I have had, I've been working in the backyard, trying to get both it and my patio cleaned up so that I can have a nice reading space by the time the cooler weather comes in. And I have a couple consecutive weeks of vacation coming at the end of the month. So right now I'm just trying to knock out around the house tasks so that I can be mostly free to mess around when it gets here. I'm counting the days right now. So that's when I'll probably take a little bit deeper dive into Mint and play around with it. And like I said, it's Mint. It's cinnamon on top. It looks basically the same. I did notice a couple of the apps, that got uplifted have a little bit different look to them. Like Lollipop Music Player looks a little different than it did in 20.3. But aside from that, yeah, it's all been pretty much same old, same old. And that's about all I've done.
Is the dark theme also a different shade of gray? I think it might be darker.
If it is, I certainly haven't noticed it. It looks really similar to me, but I don't have the greatest eye for those types of things, so it could be.
It might have been just my eyes fooling me when I was looking at a couple of screenshots.
I noticed the terminal looked a little different in terms of the color. But I can't quite put my finger on it. I don't know.
They also have I think it's part of the Muffin rebase that they Mint can handle title bars and header bars better now.
Yeah, I suppose it does look a little bit more. I don't know. I might just be filling in the blanks. It looks it looks a little bit more. I don't know. It flows better from the title bar into the application itself. I'm just looking at a couple of things here. I just got this installed a couple hours ago as we speak. And there was enough of a difference in the way the terminal looks. We'll get into all this here in a few minutes, but there was enough of a difference in the way the terminal looked to catch my eye. Like, wait a minute, it's all dark now, which I think there was like a gradient or a difference between the darkness between the title bar and the menu bar or something like that. Something's different. I can't quite put my finger on it yet, but yeah, that's all I've noticed.
All right. Now let's get into the Linux innards. So for this week, in our innards, the original plan was to talk about Kali Linux, which and Bill is planning to do a series covering various penetration testing distributions and things like that, right?
Well, we're going to start with, it's going to be a pen testing series. We're going to start with Kali. I have a feeling, though, that as we go through the series that if we talk about Kali and then we move on to something like Black Arch or something like that, when we move on, it won't do us much good to talk about the software because it's going to be all the same software.
Yeah.
There might be just very nuanced differences between those pen testing distribution, but Kali is the go-to pen testing distribution, so that's the one we're going to start with.
Yeah.
But
so for now, this is a backup topic. We decided to talk about how we customize the various desktop environments and distributions that we use specifically to fit our workflows and to make ourselves feel at home. For example, regardless of what distribution I use or what desktop I use, some of the things that I will always do is install the Papyrus icon theme, which is my favorite icon theme. And it even has, there's a package called Papyrus folders, which is not in the distros, which is not packaged as far as I know in distributions, but you can get it from the Papyrus project's GitHub. And if you run that, you can change the folder colors for the, you can change the icon colors for the folders, which I really like because
specifically on Mint, or are you talking any
no,
distribution?
you can. This is just a binary that you can install, and this is just a binary that you can download and run from the terminal.
Okay.
And it will change the colors for the folders in the Papyrus icon set. And for example, the default is blue, and when I'm using Fedora, I just leave it as blue. But I like to change the folders to reflect the distribution I'm using. For example, if I'm using Debian, I might change them to red. If I'm using Void or OpenSUSE, I might change them to green. And it has a really nice teal. On Void, I usually use their teal colored folders because it's the closest to the Void logo. And I always and I have a custom bashrc file that I use, and I just replace the default bashrc on any system with that. And two notable changes that I have in it. One of them is that the shell prompt, which is your username at hostname, and then the directory you are at, and then the $sign, which indicates that you're a regular user. I have a new line before the $sign, so the path to the directory where you are might be short, might be long, and if you have a long directory path, then the cursor and the part of the prompt where you actually type the command might be all the way to the right. But I just have the $sign and the cursor one line below all of the other things, so I can always just type, and what I type will always be at the start of a line. So even if the directory path changes, I don't the place where I type is always at the very left side of the terminal window. And I picked this up from when I was using MX Linux, which had this shell prompt arrangement by default. And I also have a bunch of aliases in my bashrc. Most notably, I have an if-else sort of, I'm not sure if it's called a loop, but it basically, it's a way, my bashrc is this way, my shell can detect what package managers are on the system. So for example, when I start a terminal, it will try to see if there's pacman on the system. If there is, it will set my default aliases for installing and removing packages and updating the system for pacman. And if it doesn't find pacman, it will try to see whether there's apt, and if there's no apt, it will check for DNF and zipper and so on. So that whenever I use the same bashrc on any system, I just have one copy of it on my data partition, and I just symlink it to my home directory. So even if I'm dual booting, for example, right now Fedora and Void, I can use the same bashrc, and whenever I open a terminal, I can just use, for example, if I want to install something, I can just type install and then the package name, and it will use the correct package manager because it already set the alias for it when I open the terminal window. And these aliases are install, remove, upgrade. So instead of typing sudo apt update and sudo apt upgrade or sudo dnf upgrade or sudo pacman syu, I can just type upgrade, which I set as alias, and it will know what package manager to call. And a drawback of this is that I might forget the default commands for the various package managers because I can just afford to use my own aliases. I might forget them over time, but it's just creature comforts. I also usually replace grub with refind, which is a great tool if you're dual booting. If you just have one single operating system, it's not very useful. You can just use whatever came with your system, either grub or system reboot. But refind is just a nice graphical way of selecting what operating system to boot into, and I created my little icon pack for the distros I use. And for the system itself, regardless of what distribution or what desktop I use, I tend to install a handful of GNOME applications that I just like to use on any desktop environment. The most notably File Roller, which is the archive manager for GNOME, the disk usage utility tool, the GNOME disks, Evans, which is the document viewer, and for example, the GNOME calculator, which is a simple calculator, but I just like how it looks. And I always keep my files, my documents on a separate files partition and not in my home directory. And what I used to do is just symlinking those folders. Like maybe I would have /files/documents, and I would create a symlink for it in my home directory instead of having a documents folder. But I realized that inside your .config, there's a file called user-dirs I think, which is the XDG user directories, where you can set a specific path, for example, your downloads directory. And if I were to set, instead of my home/downloads, /files/downloads as my downloads directory, then all of the applications that use this specification, which is most of them, would pick up on it. And when I would want to download something in my browser, it would default to /files/downloads instead of home/downloads.
I do that same thing, and I'm sorry, Norbert.
Yeah.
What I used to do is use a second hard drive, and I would literally just mount that to the home directory. And then what I discovered was that because many of your applications are sourcing that .config directory, which is in your home directory, you're going to want that to, because normally on a situation like that, I've got the system installed on like an NVMe drive, and then my home directory would be on like either a spinning Rust or a slower regular SSD drive that's a lot bigger to give me more space. But then I discovered the system runs better if you've got that .config running in the faster drive. So I started mounting or just letting it install the normal way, where the home directory is mounting it on the same drive as the system, all the system files, and then just create a second drive, and then go into that user.dirs file and changing the path that the folders use. And then I would go one step further and change those folders in the home directory to symlinks that go somewhere on that much bigger drive. That way, you've got both your applications are running, and when they go to download something, they're putting it on the bigger drive. But also when you double click in your file manager, you're taking off to that second drive as well.
Yeah.
So, and
this is a way more elegant way than what I was doing with the same links. Because, for example, when I had the same link in my home/downloads, downloads was the same link to /file/downloads. And for example, I would want to give permission for a Flatpak to see the directory, and I would give permission for my home/downloads. Flatpak would sometimes get confused because it's the same link to /files/downloads, which it doesn't have permissions for. So just just not using the same links and just point it, because if I set the /file/downloads to be the downloads directory in that config file, then Flatpak will automatically say, okay, if you want me to just have access to your downloads directory, I see that that is your downloads directory, and it works.
Yeah.
And because I have both on my machines, I have the data partition and the system partition on the same disk. Speed isn't really a factor, but because I'm dual booting two distros still, I couldn't just have my config, my entire home directory on a separate partition, because sharing the same config directory between various distributions is not a good idea because of version mismatches between various packages and programs. Yeah. And so that has been stuff that I usually do regardless of what I use. But on my desktop specifically, I mostly use XFCE, and on my laptop I either use GNOME or Sway, and these three have been the desktops that I can really feel myself at home. Interestingly, on my desktop, I haven't really found anything that I like as much as XFCE. Somehow XFCE and we just get each other, and the window management is really close to what I want from my desktop, especially with multiple displays, because I know that GNOME has a really good way of handling multiple displays, but I feel like XFCE's window management when it comes to multiple displays is a lot closer to what I found comfortable. So on my desktop with NVIDIA, I don't really plan to move to either GNOME or the window manager, or even Wayland, because I mean, if XFCE moved to Wayland, I would try that, but it's not just it's not about Wayland compatibility with NVIDIA. It's just how much I like XFCE. And on XFCE, I usually just have a single panel at the top. I say single panel but it's not really a single panel. It just looks like a single panel, because on XFCE, there's no way to position something on the panel to exactly the middle of the screen. You can position something to the middle of a given empty space. But for example, if the number of icons on the system tray changes, that will change the amount of free space. So because I have the icons for the open windows set center, that would move around as well. So I just have three separate panels. One of them like a 25% panel on the left and right, and the 50% in the middle. So they just touch each other, and it's really seamless. They connect seamlessly. You can't even tell that it's three different panels, but it gets the job done. So because I only have the open window icons on the middle panel, I can properly set it to the middle. This is something that you don't have to go through these hoops to do, for example, on Budgie or on GNOME with Dash2 panel, or even I think Cinnamon or KDE. It's just one thing that I guess it's really just my only complaint about XFCE. The lack of proper center alignment. So I only have the open window icons in the middle of the panel. On the left, I have the workspace indicators, which are not little thumbnails but numbers. Like it's inspired by the usual setups for most window managers, where they have just the numbers for workspaces at the top left. And I don't have the whisker menu because I just replace it with ULauncher. It's something that I like to use with XFCE. And ULauncher can even sometimes pick up on the GTK theme, I think. I even created my own theme for ULauncher, which matches my GTK theme, which is called Skios. I hope I pronounced it right. It's SKEUOS. And I specifically like their dark theme. It's a slightly blue tinted theme, which I actually prefer on this display as opposed to the default Advaita theme, for example, of GNOME, which is a gray, not tinted theme. And at the right on the panel, I just have the system tray and the date and the time. And while I previously said that I install a lot of GNOME applications, for example, disks and their archive manager. I do like a lot of XFC applications, and when I'm using XFC, I will use them. For example, Tuner, the default file manager, and XFC terminal. I just use those on XFC, and they have a really nice search utility called Catfish, which I like for finding files, doing file searches. I find it to be a very useful utility. But on my laptop, I usually use GNOME and Sway, both on Sway, both on Wayland. And when it comes to GNOME, I actually don't customize it a lot. I can use it fine without any extensions. I don't have a problem with playing GNOME as it is, but when I do use extensions, I usually use Blur My Shell, which is just a cosmetic addition. It replaces the gray background in the overview and the application grid with a blurred version of your wallpaper. And I also like Tray Icons Reloaded, which just gives you app indicators. And I also want to highlight the extension called Babar taskbar. It's BAR taskbar. It adds a sort of it adds a menu system to the top left of the GNOME panel, which is similar to what I described in XFC and the window managers. It adds numbered icons for your workspaces, but in addition to the icons for the workspaces, it also shows the icons next to those numbers of the windows that you have open on those workspaces. So it essentially shows icons for your open windows and applications, but it groups them it puts them in groups for each workspace. So if you take a look at your panel, you can immediately see what applications are on which workspaces, which for example you don't have on the default GNOME Dash, which is the dock-like thing in the overview. It shows you what applications you have open, but it doesn't show what workspace they are on. And I like it. This even gives you the option to just click on the numbers to go to a specific workspace when your hand happens to be on the mouse, or just click on the applications. And it's not quite like Dash to Panel, because Dash to Panel turns your panel into a taskbar, and this one just adds a couple of small indicators at the top left which happen to be interactive. And you can even add multiple menus. So you can add a button which is a one-click button for the application grid. And last but not least, Sway. I've been using Sway as my Wayland window manager for a couple of weeks. I think it's been over a month now, and I sort of take kind of a minimalistic approach when it comes to it. I just have a single bar at the top, which looks like how most people have their bars on window managers. Left side workspaces, right side system info and trackers. But I specifically moved the date and time to the middle, which I realized that I really like. GNOME is the only desktop that does that, but I just became fond of that approach. And that's really all there is to what I wanted to talk about, say about my setup. Bill?
Well, when it comes to customization, it really depends for my part, it depends on which machine you're talking about, because I've got like this machine I'm talking about or talking on is running Mint, and it's got a specific layout, and then the machine that I use upstairs in the living room is running Endeavor OS, and it's got a specific layout. And then the machine I take on the road with me is different yet. 3 different desktop environments, 3 different layouts, and I'll get into that.
And 3 different workflows as well?
Yeah, completely. On this machine, there's a few things that are different. First and foremost, I've got 3 monitors hooked up on this thing. I've got my taskbar over on the monitor to my left. The monitor to my center is just a plain desktop, which is like, for example, right now I've got OBS Studio running, and that's what I use to see the other show hosts on. And that way I'm looking at them when I'm interacting with them and talking. And then the monitor to my right is I've got Discord. It's divided into 3 sections: Discord and Telegram on the left, and then OBS Studio is running in a Mint web apps version of the Firefox browser, running the video.ninja page, and I'm running the directors panel off to the right. That way I can keep track of what everybody's doing. The left monitor, I've got 2 Firefox pages. The one on the right is giving me the show notes, and then the one on the left is showing me the YouTube stream. And then on top of that, I've got a small window where I've got the comments for the YouTube stream running. That way I can partake on that conversation. But as far as like any changes I make, when I installed Mint on this machine when I first got it, the only things I did was, and I'm running Cinnamon, by the way, I moved, I guess the default, if I remember right, the default install has the show desktop button sitting next to the menu button. I think that's right. Yeah. I moved that all the way to the right on the taskbar, much the same way that Windows is laid out. Just sorry. And then I replaced that with a Cinnamon desklet or applet that gives me a list of the bookmarks for the file manager, so I can go directly to a certain folder. And then I pin the software manager. I don't remember what's pinned by default, but I've got right now the software manager, Firefox. I've got Thunderbird on here, and the only thing I've got Thunderbird set up to monitor is the Gmail accounts that are specific to mintCast. A lot of our business type Gmail goes to our mintcast at Gmail address, and then our correspondence with the community goes to mintcast at mintcast.org. And the only reason that's the case is because when Google was doing their little thing where they were telling everybody that they were pulling the rug out from under us a few months ago, I switched a lot of our business related stuff to the @Gmail account. And so I monitor both of those with Thunderbird. And then I've got Audacity, OBS Studio, the Cinnamon terminal, and PavView control pinned to that taskbar. Other than that, I change almost nothing with Cinnamon. It is pretty much laid out in a way that is comfortable for me. Mint has always been good about just kind of making things usable as is from day one. You might make 1 or 2 tiny little changes, such as I just described right there, but other than that, it's pretty much usable out of the box. That's always been the resounding positive thing about running Mint, is it's just usable from day one.
Yeah, like I said before we started recording, and I had connectivity issues. I'm still using Void, and I guess I just chose suffering because things just tend not to work properly out of the box.
Well,
but you mentioning pinning stuff to the panel reminded me that I didn't mention how I like to set key bindings for a lot of things. For example, on my laptop, I just have separate key binding for opening Discord and even LibreOffice and stuff like that. I mean, a handful of programs. Other than Files, Terminal, and the web browser, I just have Discord, LibreOffice, and one or two other stuff.
I think now that you mention it, I do have the only custom keybinds I do is I keybind the super to the M to quickly mute the microphone for when we're on the show, and I just, it's really easy that way. And that mutes
Oh
it
yeah,
in
same.
Yeah, that mutes it in Pulse Audio, so it just mutes it all the way across the hardware. And then I also have a Control Alt H, and that uses what is that called? KDocker, which will dock any application down into your system tray, which will hide it down in there and keep you from screwing it up like Audacity or something like that, because we use Audacity to do the recording for our show, and sometimes at first I wasn't comfortable with that being open in the on the taskbar there. I was afraid I might hit it and then turn it off. I don't do it anymore, but I've got you Control Alt H will iconize or send to the tray whatever the focused window is, and it docks it there. And then
is it a Cinnamon feature?
No, KDocker is I think it's Qt based actually. It's just a separate application you have to install, but it works pretty well. It's kind of the successor of Alltray, which still works for a lot of things, but KDocker is just a little bit more modern, I think.
I have Control Shift Escape to open the GNOME Task Manager. This is the same key binding that I got used to on Windows, because on Windows, Control Shift Escape brings up the Task Manager. So I just implemented the equivalent on Linux.
Yeah, cool.
And the GNOME's GNOME Task Manager system monitor is also something I use on XFC as well.
I think there's some distros out there that I've noticed in the past have implemented that same thing. I think Pen Guy back in the day, I tried Pen Guy one time, and Control Alt Delete brought up the what do they call it? The system monitor or whatever.
A lot of people know about Control Delete, but nowadays on Windows it doesn't directly open the Task Manager. It opens that menu where you can have various, and one of these options is Task
change
Manager,
password,
and stuff like that, and maybe switch user. And if you press Control Shift Escape, it just brings you straight to the Task Manager. So I don't even use Control Delete. I haven't used it for years. So I just started using Control Shift Escape on Linux as well.
Right on. So that's my machine down here. Now, okay, upstairs, my laptop, which is the Omen that sits in the living room, it's on a TV tray, and I just kind of slide that up to the couch when I'm doing stuff that I can concentrate on while I'm sitting in the living room with the family, like you see Joe is right now. I've got a setup up there too. I wouldn't dare make the show from up there because there's just way too much life going on around me up there.
Well, normally I'd be in the garage where there's less people, but it's 100 and something degrees.
It's like 300 degrees in Texas right now because you're closer to the sun. But and I don't have a nice microphone up there or anything either. That is running Endeavor OS. For a long time, I've been running proper Arch up there, and from time to time, even Arch Linux. And I know people disagree with this, but I maintain even Arch Linux needs to be nuked and paved from time to time, because you get, especially if you're the kind of person that tries new software, you're into the podcasting scene and you're hearing about things and you're trying them out, and this don't work for me, I'm gonna nuke it off of here.
Bit rot, tech debt, whatever you want to call it,
all of that stuff. And it's just good to start from scratch. And so recently I got rid of it, and I decided I was going to give Endeavor a try, and that's probably just the way I'm going to go. As long as
I'm not sure if it's that different in this regard, because it still just uses the same Arch repositories, and it doesn't.
It is absolutely Arch, yeah.
Other than automating the installation of your desktop, it doesn't really. I mean, for example, I know that the official way of maintaining an Arch system is you have to check the Arch news, and sometimes it
You're
tells you
supposed
to yeah. So sometimes it tells you tells you that you have to do some manual intervention before upgrading and stuff like that. And I think that still applies to the Endeavor, because that's not something that can be easily circumvented when you are using the Arch repos.
The thing about using Arch too is you have to remember to. There's a lot of little details you've got to get done, like enabling a time server and just tiny little things like that. And Endeavor just handles all that for you, you know. So a lot of the reason somebody like me ever used Arch was, you know, partially for all of the control it gives you, partially for all the things that you learn. But I'm going to admit that in some cases it's an ego trip too. You know, I'm able to install Arch and get it running and get graphical, and I feel like not everybody else is able to do that. So I'm
And
a
now
Linux
Arch has
ninja.
an improved installer itself.
Yeah, I haven't tried that yet. I went with Endeavor, and then you install that, and they've even got full native support for ButterFS now, and so you know,
I'm the same. I'm the same with Fedora. Fedora is my JustWorks distro.
yeah,
And then earlier today, I upgraded my Fedora install on my laptop to Rawhide, because I wanted to try the GNOME 43 Alpha, and that was before I knew that I had to fall back to Fedora for recording the show. So right now I'm recording from Fedora Rawhide, which is like the most like which is I guess it's like Debian testing, but I'm not sure how it
I
compares
think
in
it's
terms of
like
stability.
Rawhide is kind of more akin to something like
Arch testing.
SID on Debian or Arch.
And
Yeah,
I converted my Debian installation to SID a couple of weeks ago, because I
which
was
works
just
fine too.
I mean, it works fine, because I
Yeah,
did that because when I was running testing, and I kept saying that some packages were available in SID really early after when they came out, but it took a bit longer to get to testing. For example, stuff like the NVIDIA driver. So I decided to update to SID and see whether it works, and for now it works.
I've got SID on a KVM on the machine upstairs, and it's been running for 2 years, and I've never had a single problem with it. I mean,
How
I don't
often
use
do
it for a
you
lot of
upgrade
things.
it?
Every time I start it, I'll run an upgrade, which is usually about once a month, actually, and
Yeah.
it's about what you would expect from Arch. It's a lot of upgrades, but nothing ever breaks.
I just
So
upgraded my SID system today after not using it for like 3 weeks, and it was more than a gigabyte of downloads.
it's a lot, but you're getting the stuff. Maybe not quite the same way as Arch, where it just kind of like you feel like you've got a direct channel to the project, because you can get several updates a day. I'm not quite sure if it works like that with SID, but it's
Even
relatively quick.
even Google moved from Ubuntu LTS to using a Debian testing-based system for their internal usage, because they wanted to have the latest
Yeah.
software, which is interesting, because the LTS of Ubuntu is specifically for companies who don't want to deal with upgrades. But I guess it doesn't fit Google's use case, because they do want to have updates, and relatively soon.
Well, it's a different world, isn't it? Where you know that the Linux technology is moving at a pace at which, if you're not keeping, it used to be if you weren't keeping up, it wasn't a big deal because it wasn't a lot of drama. You know, nowadays, crying out loud, there's things being enabled and things changing at such a rate to where if you're not keeping up, you get completely left behind. But anyway,
and even things like not having the latest version of, for example, the Wayland development, and also Wine. If you want to do something if I want to use something that emulates a Windows environment, like Play on Linux or Bottles or anything that uses Wine,
Wine,
Wine
Wayland,
gets
Pipewire, all those things. If
yeah.
you're not keeping up, it's just not working. So, but that machine upstairs, it's running Endeavor. I went ahead and Endeavor's icon theme, and well, that's running KDE Plasma. Now, Endeavor's flagship desktop is XFCE, which I use XFCE on the machine I take on the road, but on the one upstairs, I want it to be the one I run Plasma on. Most of the reason for all this is just so that I can keep up with the development of these things for content on here purposes, but also just for my own curiosity. And KDE, as we all know, is or Plasma, as I should say, is a constantly moving target. And there's always improvements going on there. And it works great.
XFC is really nice.
It is.
But
yeah,
once we get to know to it. I have a friend who started using Linux a year ago, and he went from Pop OS to, I think, KDE and then to XFCE, and he absolutely loves XFCE.
I wish it was better. No, well, I'll get to that in a minute. XFCE,
I wish it had more resources for development.
Yeah, it's a slow moving project. It really is. I like that there's some movement towards Wayland on that. Honestly, I didn't really. I mean, I don't know that I'm surprised that that's happening, but I'm pleasantly surprised, I guess.
It's kind of like a semi-official move to Wayland, because it's just one of the developers who is sort of dabbling with Wayland, and which may or may not get upstream to XFCE itself. But I guess you could make the argument that XFCE users like their desktop the way it is, and they don't really mind. I mean, I don't really mind it not moving as fast, because I can just rely on it being the same whenever I have something to get. I mean, it's not like GNOME changes that much or any other desktop environment, but XFCE feels like one of these certainties in life, if that makes sense.
I found it interesting that XFCE added screensavers to their native installation, like just last year, at a time when almost nobody's using screensavers anymore. But
I just been thinking about using a screensaver because, well, I guess I haven't gotten around to setting up Sway Idle, which in Sway it's a package that handles things like turning off your screen when the computer is idling, and I haven't bothered to set that up yet. So whenever I just don't use it, I just close it and it goes to sleep. But
Right.
once or twice I had to leave it on for it to work on something in the background, and then I just that was a point when I thought it would be nice to have a screensaver, because I know that screen burning it's not supposed to be a big issue nowadays, but it might still be something that's worth preventing.
You
I'm not
still
sure.
see it sometimes in like industrial cases where the same thing is sitting on an LCD or an LED screen for a long period of time. Anyway, to move along, that machine upstairs running KDE Plasma, hate me if you want, folks, but I set that thing up to look almost exactly like Windows 11. I've got a regular panel with all of my launchers sitting in the middle, and they're icon-only launchers.
The default of Plasma already kind of looks like Windows.
Well, I moved it to the center, though, the way Windows 11 is, and I have no explanation other than I just liked it right there in the center. If all it is going to be is an icon-only kind of thing.
Do you have the button for the menu on the left or in the center with the other icons?
It's in the center.
Interesting.
Yep. Sorry,
I
folks.
like to leave it on the left.
You can.
I have my Qt applications themed to look like libadwaita on my laptop, like the for example Dolphin, because I mostly use GTK apps, and I wanted to have the handful of Qt apps to integrate with them.
Right.
And I know theming KDE apps to look like GNOME apps it sounds a bit weird.
No, because you're wanting things to have a continuity that you're used to.
Yeah, I know.
That's,
I know.
You know.
Yeah.
So that's all I can really say about that machine, the one I take on the road, is running proper Arch, and the reason it's running proper Arch is because connectivity is a big issue, and I don't want anything getting on the internet doing anything in the background. And Arch is the way to go for that, because there's no automated checking for updates or anything like that without you typing the commands, and that's running XFCE. And basically, with the exception of changing over to the Arc theme, I run the Arc theme, and then I've got a few shortcuts sitting in the taskbar. And then the biggest change I make is I go into the settings manager, or the settings, what do they call that? The XFCE settings manager, and
there's also the settings editor, which is something different.
Yeah, the settings editor, which is more of akin to the the thing on Windows where the registry editor. Yeah. And you can change the method by which it does the sync, vertical sync. If you change that to GLX, then you don't have any screen tearing. And
wait. I have to look this up.
You have to try that.
Settings editor. Where is that?
It's the VSync. Go into XFWM4.
Yeah.
And then there's a setting in there. Anyway, let me walk away for a second. I'll be right back. And in the meantime, why don't you go ahead, Josh, and tell us about your setups.
Okay. Well, I also usually don't do a whole lot in the way of customizing my installs, apart from using the dark theme. That's just a must for those of us with light sensitive eyes. And for the most part, I find that the defaults on the distros I use are fairly sane, so I tend to stick with them. On Mint, with the Cinnamon desktop, I do little more than switching to the dark theme. I add the inhibit and weather applets to the panel. Inhibit to prevent the power saving functions to start and shut down your monitor and whatnot. And I place a system monitor desklet on my desktop to monitor the basics, CPU temp, network, that kind of thing, CPU activity. Then using the web apps application, I create a few launchers to place in the panel for my most used web pages and call it a day. I like to keep it simple so that in the event that I have to reinstall, it's as quick and painless as possible. Not that that happens too frequently, but just like it to be easy. So on the second distro I'm currently using, which is Manjaro KDE, I do pretty much the same thing. With KDE, there's a few extra steps to deal with in terms of how I prefer to interact with the desktop environment itself, but most of them are like really minor changes. It's not really worth going through them all. But again, I use it pretty much as it comes out of the box. The only exception that I have is when I do a Debian install, because I do use XFCE on that, and it comes in a really stock basic form. So it's ugly and it definitely needs some tweaking. So it requires...
Such are the ways of Debian.
What's that?
Such are the ways of Debian.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much everything in Debian, all the desktop environments come out pretty stock. So yeah, it requires a little more elbow grease to whip into something usable. Like I add the whisker menu and configure shortcuts and that kind of thing.
Oh, right. The whisker menu doesn't come by default on Debian, right?
No, they use the basic XFCE menu, I think it is. So you have to get rid of that and replace it, which isn't a big deal, but it's something I like to do. And I also usually
it's also something that you have to know to where to find.
Right.
Why doesn't it come by default? I think it
I'm not,
makes sense.
I think it's just again that Debian tends to ship things very stock. It's
I mean, the choice by the XFCE developers to not have it by default.
I'm not sure. I don't know. It kind of depends on the distro. I think because a lot of them do ship it with the whisker menu by default. So I think again that's just a Debian thing more than anything else.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what the reason could be on the part of the XFCE team, but they don't
That was
have
a
it.
separate. That started off as a separate project that came long after XFCE. In fact, I think Whisker Menu came out in the late 2010s, and I remember the guy that made that went by the screen name Grammy or something like that. And when he made that Whisker Menu, it was a game changer for XFCE because there really wasn't anything like it. And then you started seeing distributions including it by default, but it wasn't. I don't know that it's actually. It comes with Arch, interestingly enough, when you install XFCE. But that setting I was telling you about is V blank mode. If you change that to GLX, it takes away all the screen tearing on XFCE.
I actually prefer to use a default XFCE application menu and not the Whisker menu, because I just replaced the search functionality of Whisker menu by using ULauncher. And when I want to go into the menu and search for something manually, I find the default XFCE menu easier to navigate. At least for me, it's easier.
But this is my road machine that I take on the road, and it's just got a simple little Arch Linux.
It looks like a race car.
Yeah.
The color
scheme. It's red. It's red. Matches my truck, but it's got stickers all over it
as it should be.
Yeah. For all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, pretty much all my laptops and tablets have stickers on them.
This has got a Pentium. No moving parts whatsoever. No fan. Nothing.
Was that everything, Josh?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I don't really do much more than, add an icon pack, do some work on customizing the panel, and I don't really ever go into Debian with a plan. It's just kind of whatever I feel like at the time, go grab a theme, go grab a different icon pack, whatever, because Debian's pretty static in terms of the packages. I run stable usually. So I like to just kind of have a different look to the desktop each time, so it keeps it a little more fresh. So
it's more than I really do. I mean, I like Cinnamon. I generally like the way it all is. So all I do is, unpin some things from the panel and pin Chrome, pin Telegram, pin Discord, WhatsApp, but VLC, pin that. Of course, I have to install all of those items because they don't come stock with Mint. But change the background, maybe something comic book related or television show related, and that's it. I'm ready to go.
I mean, I think that just kind of goes to speak about the usability of Mint, is that it's just, you can install it and get right up and moving.
Some of it is also that, I changed my workflow to match what Cinnamon provided, because for a while there I was, having to do reinstalls quite often for whatever reason. And then that was several years ago. So I just wanted my reinstalls to be as simple as possible. So
now Cinnamon's come a long way. I actually installed Cinnamon in the early GNOME 3 days, which was a long time ago.
It was very early Cinnamon as well.
I mean, I remember, in fact, I used to think that Mate was a Mint project, because that was the first distribution I ever saw Mate on, and it was all...
I think they are currently involved in the Mate development in a way, but I'm not sure how they relate to it.
In the beginning, that was the only distribution I saw Mate on, and that was all in reaction to the move to, if you remember, that whole GNOME 3 thing kind of was in line with the Windows 8 and 8.1 thing, where it was all kind of moving towards a all touch interface kind of
Yeah.
workflow, and everybody just lost their mind. So when Mate
Basically everything changed at the same time, Linux
well,
and Windows.
it changed, and it turned out that it was an unnecessary change, because that change in workflow that people thought we were moving towards really never kind of happened. I don't think.
Not on the Windows side.
Not on any side. I think you've got your touch devices.
I do. That's why I like GNOME.
But I don't think everybody. I think that's a
Yeah.
minority, though.
I'm still not comfortable with using GNOME on the desktop with a mouse. So I can completely understand people when they say they don't like GNOME.
Yeah.
But under the hood, it has some really nice improvements. It had some really nice improvements since 2011. For example, the most notably in Matter and their composition.
But I think I wouldn't mind seeing the Unity project move forward too, because that kind of took that whole touch interface kind of paradigm and bridged it in a usable way, in my opinion. And I didn't feel that way at the time, but now it still feels, you go back and you look at it and it still feels kind of modern, compared to how a lot of things work.
Yeah, I think there was just an update to the Unity respin too.
And that is a sharp looking distro too.
Yeah, it looks really nice.
Yeah, at first I was a bit opposed to having the panel, the dock, a full size dock on the left. Oh, there's a car going by. I will wait for that.
We don't hear it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. At first I was a bit opposed to having an always visible dock on the left side of the screen, what Ubuntu does still, which takes up space. But I don't use that paradigm, but I became sort of okay with it. I understand. It makes sense.
It made sense for Unity. I'm not sure it makes sense for Ubuntu on GNOME.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose it's taking up real estate on the side of the screen is a little bit less impactful than taking up real estate on the bottom in a widescreen monitor era,
Yeah, that's something that Pop! OS does by default, just having an always visible dock, which takes up space right now. So, for example,
if I do flagship installs of Ubuntu, though, the first thing I get rid of is Ubuntu dock, and then basically you just get what looks like a regular GNOME installation.
Yeah.
So
I realized last year that I don't really like docks at all, because when I moved to XFCE, which was the time when I moved to Linux altogether on my desktop, I've been using GNOME on my laptop. On my desktop, I started using XFCE, and I added a dock at the bottom, which was set to intelligent auto hide. But after a while, I just removed it and I just put back the window indicators on the panel at the top, because I just like to have everything at the top, because that's where usually all the window decorations and the settings and most of the stuff that you want to click on is at near the top of the screen to begin with. So it makes sense to have this is why I have the top panel as opposed to a bottom panel.
I suppose you got less mouse travel, to get out all the window controls. Yeah, I could see the point in that. The default XFCE, or at least the default Ubuntu, used to include the panel at the top, and then
I think it still does.
Well, it used to have a second, much larger panel at the bottom that was more like a dock.
Yeah,
and then they got
the same
away
as the
from
default
doing that.
XFCE.
Yeah, I'm thinking they got away from doing that, though. I'm not 100% sure.
Mm-hmm.
But they do still have the panel at the top.
I wanted to ask everyone. Most of you mentioned setting an icon theme, but you didn't name any specific icon themes. Which ones do you usually use?
Well, with KDE Plasma on the machine upstairs, you basically have the Breeze theme. And with recent updates to Plasma, you can actually set a what do they call it? You can set a general color for the theme, a highlight color or whatever, and then it will change the color of the icons to match more conducively the colors of your desktop. You're still using the Breeze theme, but you're changing the colors, which basically changes the whole look of the theme altogether. So it's kind of running it's running what looks like the default, like what you would get in the flagship install of Endeavor OS, except it's actually just Breeze under the hood. And then for the XFCE that I take on the road that I was just showing you, that's running the Arc theme, which you can get. There's with Arch, it's kind of strange because there's an Arc icon theme in the default repos, but it's not an updated version of it. If you want the updated version of the Arc theme, you have to install it from the AUR, and that's actually pulled from the plasmalook.org website, where you would get, and there's a website like that for GNOME too, and XFCE, gnomelook.org.
Yeah, I think the main site is called Bling, Bling, and
Okay.
they just, because the first time I found GNOME Look, but there's also XFCE Look, so I assume they just have a URL for each desktop.
You can go to that website and get themes for everything from backgrounds to grub themes and everything like that, icon themes. But that Arc theme is what I go for on that machine. And then on this machine, I have literally left it as is. The what is it? The Mint X theme, where you get
Mint Y is a
I don't
default,
know.
right,
It
currently.
seems to work fine. It's got the dark panels.
No, I mean Mint Y is the name of the icon theme. The current default.
Well, there's
theme
a
of
Mint X and a Mint Y.
Yeah.
And I
think
I've
Mint
got,
Y is the default.
Let me see, just so I themes icon. Okay, yeah, you're right. Mint Y. Yep. And then the desktop is set for Mint Y Dark is the desktop theme. The icon and application theme is Mint Y, which is kind of cool that you have that kind of granular control over. You can have your applications themed one way and your desktop another.
Yeah, it is. On the Debian installs that I do, I generally either use Papyrus or GNOME Colors. One of the two of those.
Is GNOME Colors just the Advaita icon theme with colored folders?
Right.
Yeah, basically.
Which is kind of akin to the Breeze thing, where you've got the same basic theme, but you're changing the colors to be more cohesive with the color of the desktop that you're wanting to go to.
Maybe I should start installing Papyrus from GNOME Look or a similar website, because if I install it from the repos, and if I change the folder colors, whenever there's an update for the icon theme, it will override it and it will revert back to the blue ones, which is sometimes happens. So I guess if I want to circumvent that, I should not install the icons from the repos. On the other hand, if you install from the repos, you get automatic updates. But I'm not sure what.
You just don't get updated as quickly, because you're going to get it updated, when the distribution updates.
There's a question I wanted to ask. I just remembered. Do any of you set specific host names on your installations, on your machines?
On the servers, yes.
Mhm.
On machines like this, no.
Yeah, some people like to have some sort of theme for machines, uh, to just have a consistent naming scheme. I
Oh,
have a
okay.
friend.
I see what you're saying
Yeah,
now.
yeah. So, for example, I have a
Yeah.
friend who names all of his machines based on, I think, Greek or Roman mythological characters. I started naming my machines based on the scientific names of species, which it may it which might sound. So it started based. It started when I set my first wallpaper when I moved to XFC on the desktop, which was it was a microscopic photo from the Nikon Small World website, which is a microscope photography contest of a small crustacean, a copypod, which is uh, they look really cool, I think. And the specific genus of copypods that was the picture was of, the scientific name of the genus is Cyclops, and I just like the sound of that, so I just named my desktop Cyclops. And that's things. For example, my previous laptop, the name of the host name was Lacaria, because the first wallpaper I set, it was a picture of a fungus of mushrooms of the species Lacaria bicolor, which is the bicolor deceiver in English. And so I just, because the scientific name is Lacaria, so I just set the host name as Lacaria. And my current laptop, the host name is, I think it's pronounced Selene, Silene,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a bit of an interesting story because I'm using Void Linux, and I kind of like I kind of like the word void in general. And one day I was listening to a band called Forming the Void, and I was looking through the track list on the album I was listening to, and one of the songs was called Dream Root. And I found that name interesting. I looked it up, and turns out Dream Root is the name of an actual plant from Africa, and the scientific name is Selene. So I thought it would be a fitting host name because it sounds cool, and I'm using Void, so it's like coming full circle.
Yeah, that's cool.
Just-
Now that you mention it that way, I do name my machines. Well, it's not nearly that interesting, but it's a 3-part name with dashes in the middle where I put WH for all the machines that are mine for William Hauser, and then dash the operating system that it's running, and then the machine that it's on. So for example, this machine is WH dash mint cinnamon dash Ryzen, and then the machine upstairs would be WH dash Endeavor dash Omen, and then the one I take on the road is WH dash Arch dash HP, and that's just so that I've got like a way of knowing exactly what machine if I'm looking at a list of,
Yeah.
because if I look at my router configuration right now, there's probably, I'm not even exaggerating, there's probably 23 devices just in this house connected to that. And that's a way I name everybody's machine that way so that I know precisely
That's all.
whose it is and what it is.
Yeah.
Just
But
23.
Just 23.
Well, I could tell you.
If I had that many devices, I would probably use a similar naming scheme as well.
Yeah.
Let me log into my
Yeah, I'm
router
gonna look real
here.
quick since
23 seems a little low.
I forgot to mention the host name of my Surface tablet. It's called Aquarius, not based on the constellation, but based on there are the small insects called water striders, which just glide on the surface of water. And because they glide on the surface of water, I just decided to name my Surface tablet after one of their genera is called Aquarius. So I just went with it. It's a bit on the nose.
Right
Right
now,
here.
I only have 30 items connected.
Oh,
I've got 20, but here's a map, a network map for anybody that's looking at the YouTube right now. This is a map of all the devices on my network.
I see
And
5 phones.
Yeah, 5 phones, and the only reason it's this small is because none of the tablets appear to be on.
I
My
don't get the pretty network map.
This is a Linksys. I bought this router because um, you can put Open WRT on it or DDWRT, but I've just never done that because this firmware gives you all the options that I need. And it's actually only 20 devices, but that's still, I dare say, more than
It's a
a
lot.
lot of people do. So, yeah. So when I do that naming scheme, it's just to in the effort to keep things identifiable on the network. But yeah, that's an interesting thing, is most people probably just go with whatever default thing the installer puts on there. Anything else, guys?
Nope.
Nope. I guess we should move along because it's
It is
already
5
midnight over here,
p.m.
and like I
Yeah.
said, my sleep schedule is quote unquote fixed now, so I will be
Yeah.
going to bed earlier than I
We are right
used
at
to.
3 hours right
Mhm.
now. So
All right. So let's move on to. We don't have any vibrations this week, so let's move on to check this out. And in check this out, I just want to shout out again the 2 podcasts that I found. One of them is Surveillance Report, which is privacy and security news, and the other one is Opt Out, which is about services and ways how well it's described as ways to opt out of surveillance capitalism. So basically, just to be able to have the choice of what of your personal data you share and what you don't share with companies like Google, for example, for targeted advertising and things like that. Does anyone have anything to add to check this out?
nope, not me.
All right, then let's move on to housekeeping and announcements. Thank you for listening to this episode of the mintCast. If you see something that you'd like to hear about, tell us. Send us an email at mintcast@mintcast.org. Join us live on YouTube, which we are live every 2 weeks on the weekends. You can post at the Mintcast subreddit, chat with us on Telegram, Discord, and Facebook, or post directly at mintcast.org. And our next live episode recording will be at 2 p.m. US Central Time on Sunday, the 21st of August, 2022, on the mintcast YouTube channel. And we have a link in the show notes to convert this to your own time zone. Our next live stream will be 2 p.m. US Central Time on Saturday, the 13th of August, 2022. We have these roundtable streams every other weekend when we don't have a show recording, where anyone can join us on Discord for a discussion. And you can
And please do.
Yes, and you can also convert this to your own time zone via link. Our next live stream, which is not a show recording, will be at 2 p.m. US Central Time on Saturday, the 27th of August, 2022, which is a roundtable discussion where anyone can join us in the Discord for a laid back discussion. And you can also get this converted to your own time zone via the link in the description. And you can get all the live stream information at mintcast.org/livestream. And now for the wrap up, you can send me an email at norbert@mintcast.org. How about you, Joe?
Well, you can catch me on a couple of my other shows. I'm on the Linux Link Tech Show, which you can find at tllts.org. I'm on the Linux Lugcast, which you can find at linuxlugcast.com. Not really using MeWe anymore, but you can send me an email directly, jb@mintcast.org, or buy me a coffee on Ko-fi. And as for Moss, there are links for his Full Circle weekly news, Distro Hoppers Digest. You can send him a message, bardmoss@pm.me, and his other information can be found at itsmoss.com. Bill?
Well, you can email me at bill@mintcast.org. I'm Bill_H on Discord, at WCHauser3 on Twitter, at WCHauser3 on Facebook. Also, check out my other podcast. The website is 3ftpodcast.org. The name of that website, or the name of that podcast, is 3 Fat Truckers. Norbert?
I already read mine. Josh?
Oh.
You can get me at jt@mintcast.org, Josh Thacker on Discord, and at metal_foss on Twitter.
Which I'd like to add is the greatest Twitter handle in history.
Thank you, Norbert.
Before we leave, we want to make sure to acknowledge some of the people who make mintCast possible. Our team of editors, which well, who do we have? Other than I think I will be editing this episode. But I wasn't on 2 weeks ago. But I've seen the email from Victor in the vibrations.
Victor didn't get back. No,
Okay.
I did not get a follow-up email from Victor, so he hasn't been doing anything. I did some of the posting, but I assume it's mostly Bill handling the audio editing right now. So
it has been for the last couple shows, yeah.
Yeah. For this one, I want to do it because just because since I'm hosting, I haven't edited in a while. Okay, so our team of editors, Bill for all his work on the website and hosting our Nextcloud, Hopstar for our logo, Initardi for the animated Discord logo, Londoner for our time syncs, Bill for hosting the Linode, which runs our website, archive.org for hosting our audio files, and finally, and last but not least, the Linux Mint development team for the fine distro that we'll have to talk about. Thanks, Clem.
Thanks, Clem. All right, that was longer than it should have been.
You were saying short words.
Yeah.